Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Now Let's Be Honest. My name is David.
And my name is Brienne.
And we are here to do some spoiler talk on Season 3, Episode 1 of The Chosen.
Yeah.
I do know it's a little bit late right now. It is currently 10:01 p.m. where we are at. And I just want to give you a heads up right off the beginning. We are going to do another spoiler talk tomorrow evening covering episode 2, and you can expect that one to be a little bit earlier in the day. The main reason that we did it a little bit later tonight is because obviously if you've been watching this channel and stuff, I saw these 2 episodes a few days ago at the premiere in Atlanta, but I went and saw it again with Brienne, with my mom, and with some of my mom's friends, and we saw that at 6:45 p.m. and we didn't get out until about 9:15. Yeah, and originally we were going to start this at 9:30, so I apologize for starting 30 minutes late, but I didn't realize there was going to be some stuff at the beginning of that, and so I had to move it back 30 minutes last minute. But that's why we're starting a little bit later today, but I think tomorrow for the episode 2 discussion, we'll probably do it maybe around 8 p.m. or something like that. So mark your schedules, because that will be a good thing to talk about there. That all being said, we're going to hop into this spoiler discussion in just a second. Be sure that you're just kind of commenting in the live chat, because we'll be interacting with y'all, and we want to know what you thought about this. And just so you know how this is going to work, we're basically just going to walk through the plot. And we're just going to walk from beginning to end of this episode, and we're just going to share our thoughts about it and all that stuff. But while y'all are hopping in, and while we have people checking into this stream, real quick, I want to just ask you, Brienne, what were your general thoughts about this episode? Because I have already done my spoiler-free review on this channel. If you haven't seen that, go do it. And if you haven't watched the episodes yet, get off of this video and go watch that one instead, and come back to this after you've seen it. But real quick, what were your general thoughts about the episode? And feel free to throw some spoilers in there, because you know what? That's what this is.
I really liked it. I thought it was good. I haven't seen The Chosen in a while. Like, I haven't seen it since... I haven't rewatched any of the episodes, so I haven't seen it since they last aired season 2. So I was excited going in to see what it was going to be like. And I think they did a really good job. It's a little bit different than the other seasons. Just like there's like some humor and stuff that's in there. The structure is still a little bit different, and they also packed a lot into these 2 episodes, I feel like, too. And we're only talking about the first episode today. I feel like they covered a lot of stuff. So,
there's quite a bit packed in there.
And there's already a lot of character development, and we all know I like that. So,
Brienne's definitely a big character person. Barbara says hello. Hi, Barbara. It is good to see you. Glad that you could join us tonight.
Hello.
And then we also have our first question here. Hey, David, how long is each episode? So, you know what? I went into it the second time intending to time it. I totally forgot. Each episode is roughly an hour-ish, give or take. I think the whole premiere itself, the whole movie, if you want to call it that, is about 2 hours, 8 minutes, I think. And it starts off with about a 4.5-minute song by Matt Marr, which is a really good song, really good music video. And then there's about a 2.5-minute recap of seasons 1 and 2, and then it goes into the 2 episodes, and I believe that they're each roughly about an hour. I meant to look at it right whenever it got started, but I'm just gonna be honest, it totally just, like, I remembered 5 minutes, not exactly 5 minutes in. I remembered very early on, I was like, I meant to look, so that's my bad.
I thought Dallas said at the beginning that they were 45 minutes, but it seems longer than 45 minutes. But I thought he had said that at the introduction at the beginning, but I could be wrong.
He had said that. I think he was talking generally about just most of the episodes of the show.
Oh, okay.
Because he did say that, and I was like, no, they're definitely longer than that. These ones are longer episodes. We got Winnie saying, hello. I was at a well-attended showing at noon today. The 7 p.m. showing looked to be almost full. Our showing, I honestly, it didn't seem like it was packed. But whenever we were buying tickets, they were pretty much sold out. And so maybe people just didn't show up, or maybe I just didn't notice. Hi, David and Brienne. Hope you're both doing well. Yes, we are doing well. Glad to be here. Yes. Hope you're doing well, too. What says, hi, Barbara. Well, some says 2 hours, 10 minutes, but pretty close. Thanks for, so it's pretty close there. All right. So we're just going to hop right in, and we're going to start walking through just the plot of this thing. I typed out notes, and just so you know, like, I literally typed out a bunch of notes right here for both episodes, but we're just going through episode 1 today. And I do want to just give you a heads up that this is not a replacement for my episode breakdowns that I'm going to do. I don't know how long this live stream is going to end up being, but we are just walking through the plot points. There's going to be stuff that we don't address. That is totally fine. Later on, I am going to come back through and we will do full in-depth episode breakdowns, kind of like I've done with previous seasons. And so we are going to be just analyzing these episodes as much as we're going to get as much out of them as we possibly can. We're going to milk it. But this is just the first video where we're just going to talk about spoilers because why not? And this is one of the opportunities where we get to interact with one another, and you might get to point out stuff to me that I didn't notice, which is going to help me for the episode breakdowns. So be sure to be interacting in the comments below just to let us know different things that you saw. On the way, real quick before we hop in, Tawana says, hey everyone, I love the first 2 episodes. Can't wait for more. Good to see you, Tawana. And I 100% agree with you. Does season 3 deserve 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? Do you think that's possible? On IMDb, it's a current 9.4. That's pretty high. I think it deserves a pretty high rating. 100%. I mean, that's perfection.
I wouldn't say 100.
Yeah.
I think 9.4 is a pretty accurate.
Yeah. I think it's very high quality. I don't know if I'd give it 100 because there's different things I'd probably change and stuff. And obviously, it's not the Bible or something.
And I think you could probably tell in better perspective once the whole season's out, because you're like on a high whenever it's like, oh my gosh, the first 2 episodes are out. We haven't seen The Chosen in a while. So I think once the whole season's out, you can like look at all of them together. You probably have a better perspective of how it ranks.
For sure. All right. So like I said, I do have like my little spoiler thing at the bottom of the screen scrolling so that
you don't
people know that this is going to be a spoiler discussion. But like I said, as we walk through this, feel free to just join us in our discussion and talk about your favorite moments, different things that stood out to you. We are going to be walking through this chronologically through the episode, just scene by scene. But feel free to just put your comments in as we go, and we will interact with those. All right, so the season starts, I guess you could say, with a flashback scene, which I just want to point out is a contrast to season 2's opening, which was a flash forward scene. The season 2 opened up with a flash forward to the death of Big James, where everybody was mourning his death. But one connection I just realized is that both of them mention Shiva, right? Shiva is the period of mourning that people, like that Jewish people would have at the death of a loved one. And in season 2, episode 1, they open up with Shiva because they are mourning the death of Big James. This opening scene ends with Matthew's parents going into Shiva because their son is dead to them. Right. And so you see, once again, just the writing of the show is pretty consistent and just how they're opening things up. One was a flash forward, one's a flash back. We open up AD 24, and I believe the current timeline for the show is AD 27. I remember the first 2 seasons kind of went back and forth between like when stuff took place. They would go back and forth between AD 27 and AD 30. And so this, I'm assuming that we're currently in AD 27 in the show. And so this scene is 3 years earlier, and we have a scene where Alphaeus, who is Matthew's father, he is unable to pay his tribute. Some Roman dude shows up and he's going to put him under arrest. But then Matthew comes out and he tries to save his father, and he manages to get the Roman guy to go away by Matthew just saying, oh, I miscalculated something, even though he didn't, obviously. He's just trying to help his dad out, and they get into a bit of an argument, him and his dad do. And this is a scene that we'd already seen elements of because they had released an early version of this scene, and we also had seen like the script released like a while back. And so we'd known this was going to be the opening scene, and we'd have this intense moment where we actually get to see Matthew's true colors showing up, because in the first 2 seasons we really, we saw Matthew as a purely sympathetic character. And Dallas told us in season 2, I remember especially after episode 3 of season 2, he said, hey, we're gonna have to deal with some stuff with Matthew, where his true colors are gonna kind of come out there, and you're gonna have to see that he's not a picture perfect person. And we see that here, where he admits to his dad that he chose a secure future and that he doubted God's providence of the people. He says, hey, like, since when has God provided for us? And then eventually Alphaeus renounces Matthew and says, I have no son. And he tells the mother, Elisheva, I believe her name is, go adorn your headdress and close all the windows because we're going to into our mourning period for 7 days. So what do you think about that opening scene?
I like Matthew's character, and I think that this scene was really important because later on, once it goes back to the current time that the show is in, it gives a lot of depth as to why Matthew is this like emotional character and why he's going through so many things, because you see like hints here and there just by his body language and the way he interacts with some of the other characters that something is different about Matthew. And being able to have this flashback, it adds a lot of context to that.
Yeah.
And so it helps a lot, and I appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's something that we've been aware of. Like, we knew that something had to have happened.
Right. We should
ever
know
since,
what
I guess, season 1, episode 2, really?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in episode 1 of the show, we knew that Matthew was an outcast because as a tax collector. But episode 2, that was remember, that was the whole Sabbath day episode where we even see Matthew he's wanting to go visit his family for Shabbat, for the Sabbath, but he ends up just eating outside with his dog.
He just looks like through the window or something.
Yeah. Which, I mean, now that we know the backstory there, which obviously they probably hadn't written that far into it, but now it sheds a whole new light on that scene in season 1, because you see that things were already working in Matthew's head. The fact that he was willing to even try to approach his parents, and was even considering trying to celebrate Shabbat with them
before the Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, that shows that Matthew, like, even where we see him in season 1, he has already made a lot of progress than where we see him in this opening scene.
Right.
Because something has happened in between that got him to be like, man, I need to go visit my family. And then he just chickened out. And so a lot of stuff going on there. Winnie says, it was such a painful scene. I'm a mom of 2 sons and can't imagine doing that to them. Yeah, I think we just live in a different culture. And you've got to you understand both perspectives. I think in our current culture, we tend to actually empathize more with Matthew because his whole thing was choosing a secure future rather than trusting in God. And I think that's probably more the, especially if you're in America, that's probably the more American mentality or just the Western mentality of approaching things, right? Choosing security over insecurity, right? Like just saying like, oh, I'm going to choose what seems like the secure path for me rather than the big question mark. Matthew chose the American dream, right? He chose the path to success, whereas his family was willing to not be successful as long as it meant trusting in God.
And people of that culture in that time period, there's a really big emphasis on keeping like the family name and the reputation that you have and the people around. And we see that not only in Matthew's situation, but we also encounter it whenever it comes to Judas and his sister talking with each other too. I don't even know if that was first episode.
That was
it?
That
okay.
was,
yeah. And so there's a big thing about family reputation and your family name going down and carrying that through different generations. And that's something that we also don't experience over here. So there's a disconnect, I think, there too.
It's the idea of the individual culture, like individualism versus communal culture. And they were like, cultures were a lot more communally focused back then, which is good. And a lot of cultures still are that way, just not over in the West. Like we're very, we're very self-focused and stuff like that. And so we still haven't even reached the opening credits yet because it immediately cuts from Matthew in AD 24 to Matthew in the present day. And I don't believe it shows a date whenever it cuts there. I don't think so. But we actually get to see Matthew standing there listening to Jesus at the Sermon on the Mount. And basically the way that this first episode is structured is that really, and I mentioned this in my spoiler-free review, I mentioned it was structured kind of weird, but I actually don't mind it at all. Really, it's almost like 2 separate episodes. The first half of the episode is the immediate aftermath of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where you just literally have them still at the stage, still at that area. And the second half of the episode is the succeeding aftermath of the Sermon on the Mount, right? It's the stuff that comes a little bit after that once they've departed there, right? And so it's really 2 different pieces there. And one thing I just want to point out right off the bat, I don't know if you noticed this, but I could not stop thinking about this even whenever I was at the premiere. I feel so bad for poor Nathaniel because he spent so much time devoting himself to building that stage for Jesus. And Jesus never even stood on it. Like we literally
him at the end,
yes, he literally, he did thank him at the end, but he literally at the end of season 2, he walks out there, he steps up there and everybody sits down. And I was expecting like season 3, I was expecting them to, him to preach up there for a little bit, then go down. And to be fair, we didn't see the full Sermon on the Mount.
That's true.
And so it's possible that they did record the whole thing and maybe he was on this stage for a little bit and then he came down, and who knows, maybe they'll even layer it throughout the season. I don't know. I'm not saying they're going to do that, but it just cracked me up because literally every scene that we saw, he was on the ground. And I was like, poor Nathaniel, he did that's a big old stage. And especially back then, it's like, he put a lot of effort into building that. And then Jesus immediately gets off the stage to just go talk to people. I'm like,
stand on the grass.
It's like, dang it. Just cracked me up. He says, let's see. Hey, David, I think, in my opinion, you're a very handsome guy. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. That is very flattering. Imagine if your son defrauded some families out of their money. Yeah. I mean, it would be horrific, and it just totally ruins your reputation. Like that really would mess people up. I totally understand Alphaeus' reaction. I understand Alphaeus' reaction as well. But also it's a hard decision to make, and he admits later on in the episode that he acted rashly. And so he said, like, we can understand where he comes from. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to agree with his choice. And that's what Alphaeus is saying there as well. Okay, and so we move on, and we're at the Sermon on the Mount. And basically what we have is we have just a bunch of different moments where Jesus is quoting different Sermon on the Mount stuff. And we're going to cut from one person to another and just see the reactions because it's specifically impacting them. So the first thing is him saying, you have heard that it was said, you shall not murder, but I say to you, do not be angry at your brother, and whoever has done that, he is already liable to judgment and all this stuff. And he goes on, and eventually he gets to his examples, because that's basically how the Sermon on the Mount is structured, right? He says, you have heard it was said this, but I say this, and here's some examples of how. And one example he lists out, and this is basically setting the groundwork for the whole episode, that's why this happens before the opening credits, is he mentions that if you are going to offer a sacrifice at the altar, and you realize that your brother has something against you, get up, go to your brother, and reconcile to him first, and then come offer your sacrifice. Right? And so basically the whole point that Jesus is saying is that God cares more about how we love one another than he does about just empty religious action. And that's going to settle groundwork there. And so we see both Matthew being impacted by this and also Andrew being impacted by this. And then we also have Jesus talking about do not be anxious. And he lists out a bunch, the whole look at the birds of the air and the flowers of the field and everything. And it cuts to Andrew, and we get to see the wheels turning in his heads too. And they're starting to choke up and get a little bit teary-eyed. And then Mother Mary walks over to Matthew and says, how's he doing so far? And Matthew says, he's got all the words perfectly, but something about them's different. And she says, it's how he's delivering them, isn't it? And he says, yeah. And then it cuts to the opening credits. So what do you think about that just opening scene there with the Sermon on the Mount stuff?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. My favorite part was whenever Mary went up to Matthew and he was like, there's something different. She said, he's actually saying it this time. Like, he's actually saying it now.
Yes.
And I was like, that was a cool way of wording that. Like, it was cool. That was my favorite part of the beginning before the credits.
Double-edged sword. Are the 2 episodes in theater good? Yes, they are good. And if you haven't seen them yet,
You should go.
probably get off of this video, go watch the spoiler-free review, because I talk about how good they are. But don't watch this unless you want to get spoiled. I'm excited for season 3. You should be excited for season 3. If I haven't watched the first 2 episodes, should I be watching this? No, you should go watch the spoiler-free review. Dwayne Smith. Hey, I met Dwayne. He was at the premiere with me, and he was actually, he shows up in the vlog that I uploaded. So go check that out if you want to meet Dwayne. He says, I was part of the Sermon on the Mount, and they did record Jesus saying a few small lines from the sermon on the stage. Okay. That's okay. Cool. That's
the insight.
There you go. The insider insight. Thank you for letting us know about that. Medina says, hey, David, will there be more on the backstories of Thaddeus and little James? I'm not sure. We get a little bit more about little James in episode 2. I'm not sure if we're going to get a whole lot more backstory. I think they're really going to be focusing more on moving forward.
The ministry of the 2x2.
But I mean, it's going, like, that's one thing. They do have room for a lot of backstory stuff in the 2x2 ministry and stuff like that. But I really don't know there. I like how during the love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, the scene cuts to both Simon and the Roman official. Forgot his name. Atticus. Yes. And we're going to get to that in just a second, because after the Sermon on the Mount, it cuts, after the opening credits, it goes back to the Sermon on the Mount, and we just get more little tidbits of Jesus saying stuff. And chronologically speaking, this is kind of spliced all around. Because it's not like just moving through the Sermon on the Mount. It's actually like moving forward and jumping backwards and stuff like that. Which is totally fine. And he's talking like different groups. And so I think the idea is that he's going from one group to another and teaching the same different stuff. But he starts off, and I just have a list here of the different stuff he said. First off, you have the eye for eye, tooth for tooth thing, right? You have heard it was said, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, but I say love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's where it cuts to Simon the Zealot. And then he says, you have heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, and that's where it cuts to Atticus and Simon Peter, whose name is not Peter yet. He's just still Simon. I don't know when they're going to call him Peter. And then we have him saying, this is how you should pray. And you've got all the other disciples who are reciting the prayer alongside him. And that's because back in season 2, I think it was episode 7, is whenever he taught them that prayer. And so this is actually the 3rd time we've seen the Lord's Prayer in the show, because he taught it to the little children in season 1. episode 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then season 2, episode 7, whenever he got back from everything, like, I think it was John.
Nighttime.
Yeah, it was nighttime. And John said, hey, John the Baptist's disciples taught them how to pray. Will you teach us as well?
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus teaches them.
Yeah.
And so they've obviously learned it, which I think is good that they showed that there, because it shows that they have been learning the things that he's taught.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah.
I loved that part.
Yeah.
That was
them
awesome.
like just saying it with them? Yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't all at once. Like it was like they would say part of the Lord's Prayer and then it would go to a few of the other things and then back to the next part and it would pick up in different, and I think it was like 3 or 4 different times. And I really liked it because every time it would cut to different disciples and they would all be saying it, but you could tell that it was different than usual. Like they were processing it in a different way. They're like, well, this is a prayer that we like have always said, but like it's hitting differently now. Yeah. And that was my favorite part. I loved that part.
Yeah.
And
no, you could just see like the acting. This is what I was talking about in the spoiler-free review. The acting has stepped up.
Yeah.
To where just like the facial stuff, like they're all saying the same words and they're all standing in the same positions, but just the face acting shows that they're all processing different things. To where you can literally just pause and be like, what is John thinking right here? Which is really cool. Then he talks about laying up treasures in heaven. Oh, wait. Well, no, he talks about forgiving us our debts as we've forgiven our debtors. And it cuts to Mary Magdalene, which is going to be important for later on whenever Andrew apologizes to her. Yes. Right? Because she needs to learn to forgive whenever somebody's done something to her.
Yeah.
And then lay up treasures in heaven. He talks about that. And it cuts to Zebedee, which I thought was interesting because it makes me wonder what they're going to do with that.
Yeah.
Or if that was just they wanted to cut to Zebedee. Because Zebedee is going to be starting a little bit of a business. So I don't know when it comes to laying up treasures in heaven. And then it also cut to Matthew again. And I think the reason it would cut to Matthew there is because he is learning to set, like, he was one way, right? He was laying up treasures on earth, but now he's renounced that and he's laying up treasures in heaven. And then it also cut to all the other disciples just standing there. And then the last thing, and this is really the big moment, which does come at the very end of the Sermon on the Mount, is where Jesus says, whoever hears my word and does them is like a wise man who builds his house upon the rock.
Yeah.
And then like when he says the rock, it just like there's like this drum beat and it's like zoomed in on Jesus' face and then just like cuts to black. And so that was the final little moments we have of the Sermon on the Mount there.
Yeah.
Hey, look. Hey guys, I saw you both tonight. Awesome seeing you. Yes, it was great seeing you at the theater. That was actually really exciting. We wish we could have talked to you a little bit longer, but we had to get back here to get to this live stream. But it was really good seeing you. Yes. Okay, last question. But do you see the people behind The Chosen to add more episodes? Do you see the people behind The Chosen to add more episodes in later seasons? I've noticed some TV series like Breaking Bad or something adding a few episodes towards the end. I don't think they're going to make longer seasons. I think they're going to stick to the 8-episode structure. I think that's what you're asking there. I think they're going to stick to the 8-episode structure, and yeah, that's fine. And so there's probably a lot of things they might just not cover in the show. I don't think they're going to cover every single gospel moment. I think they're just covering certain things. But yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else you want to say about the sermon itself and the execution there?
I think they did a good job with tying like the actual sermon to last season whenever it was just Jesus and Matthew talking together. And they were going through stuff and it was flashing to like different of like the different disciples and it was like scenes we've already seen but also stuff we like hadn't seen yet, and now you go to where Jesus is actually talking at the Sermon on the Mount and it's going to the different disciples too. It like ties them together in different ways. And I thought they did a good job.
Because it's like they did it with the Beatitudes, but then also because the in season 2 it was the Beatitudes, but it shows how like that's the good thing that we've done, like by getting to see the different storylines they laid the groundwork for, we get to see how the different things in the sermon apply to the disciples, which also allows us to figure out how it applies to us, right? Because we're getting to see it there. I'm the only one. Am I the only one who notices Judas did get nothing from the sermon? I have a feeling we will see a parable of the sower being played out through Judas and Simon. It actually did cut to Judas at one point. I don't remember which scene it, like which part it was, but there was one point where Jesus was talking and it did cut to Judas, but it cut to him and multiple other people. So I forgot to write it down. I was taking notes while watching this, and so I couldn't keep track of everything. But it did actually cut to Judas at some point. And I don't think that they're wanting to make us like hate Judas or anything at this point. Thanks for answering. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So moving on. Now we go to the immediate aftermath of the sermon. And the first person we cut to is Yusef, right? The Pharisee who was kind of the protege or companion of Shmuel, or Shemuel, however you want to pronounce it, which we haven't seen Shmuel in the season so far, but we know he's coming because he was in the trailer. And he is kind of leading the opposition against Jesus right now. But the wheels seem to be turning in Yusef's head. And Yusef seems to be kind of coming towards the Jesus side.
Yeah.
And what it seems to me is that they seem to be laying the groundwork for a popular fan theory about Yusef, because the name Yusef, if you didn't know this, it's the name Joseph, right? Yusef is just like a more Hebraic version of Joseph. And it seems to me that they're laying the groundwork that Yusef will possibly be Joseph of Arimathea, the guy who eventually gives Jesus his tomb. And the reason why is because later on in this episode, he writes a letter to Nicodemus. And we know that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were both prominent Pharisees who were secret disciples of Jesus, who had correspondence with one another because they were the ones who both got together at Jesus' death and finally made themselves more public as disciples by burying Jesus. And Joseph of Arimathea had a tomb in Jerusalem. And we know that Joseph says that he has family living in Jerusalem right now. And that he is only in Galilee for a short while.
Yeah.
And so it seems like Yusef, it seems like that's the groundwork they're laying there, which is kind of exciting. Cool. Yeah, it's just kind of a cool little thing. Like, oh yeah, because I don't know if they originally intended that whenever they created this character, but it seems like that's more. I could see it being a possible fan theory where they're like, you know what, that's a good idea. Like, let's go with that way because the character is really likable. And they're like, yeah, let's let's give him more prominent stuff. It could have been the plan from the beginning. I don't know. But we see Yusef pondering stuff, and we have different people walking by. We have Barnaby and Shula, and then there's another person who walks by. I couldn't recognize who it was, but he looked very familiar. I'd have to rewatch it and see if it's just like a cameo from a famous actor, or if it's just like somebody we've seen in the show. I don't remember, but Yusef's pondering this, and then it cuts to Judas, and he is going to meet with Bob the businessman, whose name we learn to be Adad. And basically, there's a just brief interaction where Judas says, "Hey, I'm quitting."
Yeah.
And they have this little back and forth about like suing one another and stuff like that. But Judas basically says, hey, there's nothing that you can take from him that would be of any worth to you. Yeah. And so Judas just says, hey, I'm leaving and I'm going to go follow Jesus. What do you think about just those interactions, like with Yusef and Judas and all that stuff?
So I guess this is kind of a really important scene because we're getting a more idea of like who Judas is, because we really haven't had any interactions with him that much, and I really like how they have portrayed Judas so far. And I think this scene was the start of it. And so well, and we get to see the inner struggle still, which is good, because there's little things like just said by other characters we're like, okay, he seems like a guy who has a lot of ideas of what he wants to do, but he gets caught up in, like, especially in the interaction between him and his sister. He's a guy who he gets really passionate about things for a short while, but then like maybe gets distracted. Like when it comes to through isn't necessarily there.
And that he's very motivated by money. Like just little things where you're like, okay, like you empathize with the guy and you love him, but you're like, okay, I see some cracks in the armor.
Flags,
which, like, it's always possible that Jesus could change him, right? And like Jesus changed worse than that. But we know what Judas' story is going to be. We also see another reaction from Gaius and Atticus, right? Gaius is sitting up on a horse, and Atticus walks up and says, "So, what do you think?" And Gaius is just silent. And what we see over both this episode and the next episode is that Gaius has a lot of things just going on in his head, but we just don't know what they are. Like there's just a lot of wheels turning. And you can tell he's just processing silently, and he's almost afraid to voice things publicly. Probably because it would get him in a lot of trouble if he voiced the things that are going on in his head.
Gaius is an interesting character. And I'm interested to see like what they're going to do with him. Because you can tell that like things that Jesus is saying is making him rethink stuff. But also, I think Matthew leaving him and him having like such a soft spot for Matthew, that's also changing him too. It's almost like he's being changed like secondhand. So it's like he encounters Jesus, but also seeing how Jesus is working through Matthew, I think is changing him too, which is interesting.
And Gaius is another one where I wonder how prominent he was going to be at the beginning.
Yeah.
Where in season 1, it seems like his main thing was like to just show that him and Matthew had a bond.
Bodyguard, yeah.
But then people started theorizing about, ooh, who is Gaius going to be as well?
Yeah.
And we know, like just from the trailer, we know that Gaius is going to be the centurion who has a servant who is sick, and he's going to finally approach Jesus and say like, hey, like, will you help him?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, it makes me wonder whether or not they planned all this ahead of time, or if the fans just the impact of that stuff. But it's really cool. Just once again, the acting is just getting better. The understatedness of it all, to where you see that something is going on in Gaius's head.
Yeah.
And just by his silence that it's probably in Jesus' favor.
Right.
And Atticus seems to be aware of that as well. And Atticus even says, he says, I think we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's like, yeah, same. But he says it sarcastically, but it seems like they just have two different coping mechanisms. Right? Like, Gaius, he just gets quiet, and he's just like more
introspectively.
He's introspectively thinking about things, whereas Atticus seems to more like deflect. And he's like, oh, I'm just going to deflect with humor.
Which makes sense because he's a zealot, right?
Well, he's not a zealot. He's he's a Roman as well.
Oh yeah.
He's like a Roman like leader dude. Like, he's the one like against the zealots, right? He's like the secret agent Roman dude.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting. Like, just once again, the characterization is just really good. And I just like that whole interaction. I loved Atticus' reaction. And so excited about Gaius. Absolutely. Is Gaius a centurion? Yes, he is. He actually got promoted to centurion, I believe, in season 2. Hey David, just wondering what the Hebrew letters on your plaque in the background stand for. Oh, this is the Hebrew word chesed. We actually, Brienne and I have been doing a series going through that. And so, Gaius is definitely the centurion that has the faith, and Atticus will be the one that says truly this man is the Son of God. That's interesting. I hadn't even thought about Atticus being that guy, but that would actually be kind of cool. And I could totally see Atticus it would be a much longer process for him to where he eventually realizes, whoa, truly this man is the Son of God. That'd be kind of cool. Is it possible for Nicodemus to show up? I love his character so much. Nicodemus and Abigail are my favorites in season 1. Hopefully they show up in later episodes. Nicodemus, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a little cameo in season 3. I don't think he's going to be prominent in this season, but I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up at some point, even if it's just very briefly. Abigail, unfortunately, I don't think they're going to bring her back, mainly because she's a child actor. And just given the amount of time that has passed with filming, that actress has actually like grown up a whole lot, and just the amount of time that's passed in the show is not that much. And so that's the issue when you're working with child actors. They grow up a lot. And it's literally been a year and a half since season 2 came out. Yeah, that's crazy. And so whereas in the show, it's literally like a day. Right. And so when you're working with adults, you can make that work. With child actors, I mean, little Abigail, she's like almost an adult now. So I don't know. She's probably like a teenager, but it's, she's quite a bit older. Thanks. Okay, there you go. All right. So moving on, now we cut backstage, right? So we're just kind of moving, like we started with the sermon, and then we see everybody there in front of the stage is like processing this. Then we go backstage, and we have Jesus being handed some food by his mother. And then he goes to sit down, and the first person he's approached by is Matthew, who is wanting to seek some clarification on stuff that Jesus added into the sermon last minute that weren't in his notes. And Matthew, he's not understanding the metaphors, and he's seeking clarification. And Jesus is like, dude, I just need to chill. Like, not right now. Not right now. Time. Like, go sit down. Please do not do that. We do have James saying, I think Gaius is both characters. I don't think they'd have him be both characters, mainly because I think that if Gaius is the one who had faith in Jesus at the beginning, I don't think that they would have him also be the person realizing it at the end, because it'd be kind of weird for him to have faith in Jesus, yet also be the one responsible for putting Jesus to death. A lot of movies have made both centurions info. Maybe. I don't know. I doubt they would do that, but it's possible. Okay. So Matthew comes up, but then Jesus says, hey, I'd actually like to talk to this other person. And this is where Judas and Jesus interact with one another. And we get a lot of interaction here. What did you think about this first meet between the two of them?
Well, it's hard to watch that scene and not read what you know is going to happen in the future into it. But even with that being said, I feel like that adds a lot of weight to it. So the conversation itself wasn't too weighty, but whenever you're thinking about the repercussions and things that are going to come later, and even, I guess, just some things that they say are like hints as to what is going to happen, it was a very like weighty conversation. No,
there's different things in there, and then there's stuff that Judas would say, and they would just cut to Jonathan Rumey's face.
And he wouldn't always say anything.
No, he wouldn't say anything.
Just look.
And it wouldn't be overacted, right? It wouldn't be like, it was just a look in his eyes to where you could tell that he is supposed to be acting like he's just processing something, or that he knows, like there's a light in his eyes where he knows something that Judas doesn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And there's just a few specific lines where it just cuts to his face, and you see like Jesus is aware of something, but he's not giving it away, right? Yeah. It's not like, you know, you don't have like this like dramatic drum beat in the background. No, it's just there's interacting, but Jesus is aware of something. Yeah. Real quick, I wonder if we're going to see Mary and Martha this season, and who do you think the woman from the behind the scenes with the red head scarf that was in the water could be? I don't watch a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. I'm going to be honest with you, because I don't keep up with a lot of that stuff. But I do think we probably will see Mary and Martha this season. We're probably going to see Lazarus in episode 3, because Lazarus, I think, is going to be in the scene in Nazareth whenever Jesus is rejected, and I think that's coming in episode 3. And since Mary and Martha are Lazarus's siblings, I wouldn't be surprised if we actually meet them there, and I wouldn't be surprised if they show up later in the season as well. But his eyes said everything. I agree. I mentioned his eyes multiple times right here. This is talking about Jesus' eyes. So let's walk this interaction real quick. So first off, literally the first thing I mentioned is that I put Jesus' eyes when Judas mentions financial skills. Because Judas says, I want to follow you. And he says, essentially, I have a certain set of skills.
Exactly.
That would make me useful to you.
Yeah.
Right? And he mentions that I'm good with money. And I think that I could use money to accomplish your purpose, essentially. Yeah. And it cuts to Jesus. And you know that they're thinking about two totally different things. Because Judas is thinking, I want to help you
further your ministry.
Which technically he's going to do.
Yeah.
But not because he's being faithful.
Yeah.
He's going to do it because he is going to use money to sell Jesus to fulfill Jesus' ultimate ministry in the sense of giving himself up as a sacrifice. But that's out of disobedience and rebellion and lack of faith. So just little details like that where it's beautifully worded, where Judas comes in here kind of cocky. Yeah. Not intentionally, like he's just excited and he's saying, hey, I want to contribute. I want to help. I want to serve.
Yeah.
And he thinks immediately in monetary perspective because that's the life he knows.
Yeah.
And he says, I want to help you with this. I think I can do this. I can help you do this stuff. And it cuts to Jesus' eyes. And it's like, he's like, yeah, you will help me. But not in the way you think.
Yeah.
You know? And then Jesus says, okay, well, if you're going to follow me, there's only one thing I ask, because Judas starts like trying to defend. He's like, oh, I went to Bet Midrash, which is just like Hebrew school. And Jesus says, I actually don't ask any of those things of my followers. The only thing I ask is that you will seek to be like me.
Yeah.
And Judas says, I'll do it. And Jesus says, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to be harder to be like me than like any other rabbi. And there's multiple layers to that comment, right? First off, because he's God.
Right.
Like in the flesh, he's literally perfect. So any other rabbi, you expect them to mess up. You expect them to fail. I mean, I've got students, you know, and I'm their Bible teacher. So in a way, I'm their rabbi. But I tell them right off the bat, I was like, I am a failure. I am a sinful person. Like, try to be like me, but not too much like me, because I am sinful. Jesus, it's going to be harder to be like him because he doesn't mess up. He's perfect. But also because he challenges them. And it's going to be harder to be like him because they're expecting one thing of him and he's going to do something different. And they need to get used to different, right? Hey, David, do you see Jonathan's version of Jesus speaking Aramaic like in the movie Passion of the Christ, like in later future scenes? Because the actor was seen praying language in prayer ceremony. I think that they'll have him say different things in Aramaic, but I think the only things that they would have him say in Aramaic are probably the things that are quoted in Aramaic in the Bible. Like, so maybe whenever he raises the girl from the dead, which is actually coming up in the season probably, when he raises Jairus' daughter, he's probably going to say Talitha kum, because that's quoted in Aramaic in scripture. And then probably when he's on the cross, he might say, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. But other than that, I imagine they'll just keep him speaking English. It'd be kind of weird for him to just transfer into Aramaic. And then there's another place where you see, once again, Jesus' eyes, when Judas says he wants to change the world. It's like, it just cuts to Jesus. And Jesus is like, you will change the world. But it's not like Jesus, it's not like Jesus frowns or anything like that. He just smiles. But it's all in the eyes, which once again, the acting is just really good, because I just want to know, like, how is Dallas telling Jonathan to act in this moment?
Oh yeah.
You know, like what is it like, just as an actor, like how do you get in that headspace to where it's like you're being friendly to somebody, but you know something they don't know, but you're not like there's just so many levels of complexity there. Especially when you're playing the Son of God, right? Who's like, who knows everything in a sense, and it's just like crazy. Judas was boasting about his good works rather than having faith, especially when he's talking to his sister. You can tell what Jesus said on the sermon. Judas didn't meditate on Jesus' words. And yeah, and once again, I don't think we can totally just get on to Judas about that totally yet, because he admits he's only heard a sermon and he's new to this. And it's not like we should expect somebody to immediately click on everything.
Yeah. Well, you can tell that he's really excited. Like you can tell that he has like this like passion behind it, to where he's like so excited he's just ready to like jump at it.
Yeah.
And I would say that we see the same thing with like Simon too. He has the same tendencies and like the same kind of temper in a different way, but he has some of the same tendencies in his behavior and stuff, where he like gets really excited and so he wants to like jump at the situation. So it's kind of the same thing with him too.
Yeah. And there is an element of faith there, because he's still leaving everything. He's quitting his job and he's going to do this, but it's a challenge because he's like, well, we need to try to do something, right? And then just to end up in that little interaction there, Judas says, I'm ready to do hard things.
Oh yeah. Jesus asked
and Jesus
him,
says,
are you willing to do hard
things? And Jesus says, we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't say, okay. He just says, we'll see. Like, it's just like the implication of, we'll see if those hard things are what you're expecting.
Yeah.
Right? Are you willing to do the hard thing, or you can do the easy thing? Because in the end, he's going to do the easy thing, which he probably thinks is the hard thing.
Yeah. Right.
The easy thing is to end up just trusting in money over Christ. And just really beautiful handling of that. And just that whole interaction was just so great, because you got to be careful how you write that. Because you don't want to make Judas over sympathetic, but you also don't want to make him overly villainous.
Right.
And you don't want to make it too super dramatic, to where like the way that Jesus and Judas interact, everybody would know.
Suspicious from the beginning. Yeah.
Because everybody'd be really weird. Like, hey, Jesus, why did you just dramatically look off into the distance whenever that dude walked up? Like, like they handled it really, really well. And I just thought that was really good. He heard the best sermon. Yes, he did. That's from episode 2. That's actually really funny stuff. All right. So then, all the disciples gather around, and Jesus announces them basically, that they need to take some time off. He says, I'm going to go do my own thing for a little bit. Y'all need to take some time off. And he says to Simon, especially you, because you have a wife to take care of, and she's been missing you. It was fine. She really enjoyed having you gone for a while, but now she misses you, which is cool, because it's like, oh, did she tell him that, or did he just know? Yeah. And then he prays the Aaronic blessing over them. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you, and all that stuff. And then they go their separate ways, and we cut to a new woman who we have not met prior to this moment, and her name is Joanna, who is a character from Scripture, and in Scripture, she is one of the wealthy women who supported Jesus' ministry. And so that's kind of cool. Like, they wait a second to say her name, because like, she's not such a prominent person that everybody's going to know who she is. Yeah. But if you know who she is, you're like, oh, cool. That's really neat that she's here. Yeah. And so she shows up. And the way that this whole scene is kind of structured is kind of cool, because there's multiple like handoffs. Like, first off, it's her interacting with the women, and then the women get Andrew over there. So then Andrew's interacting with them, and the women leave. And then Andrew gets Jesus, and Jesus and Andrew are both interacting with her, and then Jesus and her leave, but then Simon comes up to talk with Andrew, and it's just like, I was just noticing this the second time through, especially, just it's a kind of complex scene, to where it's just like
all these people are moving around.
Yeah, but it feels very organic. Like, that's like a lot of times you'll watch like a TV show, and it's like, I've literally seen people like walk into a room, say something to somebody, and then just like leave, and you're like, that's not how life works. Yeah. But just like that little thing, it's like, oh, that's kind of just, from a directorial perspective, they're accomplishing a lot by just laying the groundwork for the episode, but also in a very dynamic and organic way. So I thought that was cool. So Joanna shows up, and she's interacting with the women, and you can see that they're all reacting differently to her gift. She offers them this really fine piece of fabric, because she wants to just give it to them to, like, she's like, y'all didn't ask for contributions, but I want to give it anyways. And the way that she's acting, she is kind of awkward. And so that immediately raised some suspicions to some of them, but I think she's just in a weird scenario where she's like, I don't know how to handle this. I just want to give this to you. Yeah. And so some of them are like, why? Like, are you sure? Is there a catch? Yeah. Like, what's the catch? Like, something strange is going on here. But eventually she mentions that she was from Macaris. And so she was actually kind of serving in Herod's group. Macaris is actually down by the Dead Sea area, I believe. And this is where John the Baptist is currently imprisoned. And so they're like, oh, you're in Macaris. Yeah. Like, so they get Andrew to come up, and Andrew, it always cracks me up just how the Noah James, that's the actor, how he acts like as Anxious Andrew.
Yeah.
Anxious Andrew, that has a ring to it.
Alliteration.
Yeah. But he just always acts so funny.
Yeah.
To where he just like he just starts freaking out. It's almost like it's just funny to me.
Yeah.
But he starts freaking out. He's like, "What? You heard about John?" And he's like, "Ah!" Like it's like a little Energizer bunny. Yeah. He's like, so much going on in my head. And so he gets really paranoid about John and Macaris and all that stuff. And then eventually Jesus walks up and he immediately says, "Hello, Joanna."
Yeah.
And he doesn't ask her name.
Hello.
And it makes you wonder, did the women? Because the women went and got Jesus.
Yeah, Mary did.
And so it makes you wonder, okay, did she tell him her name? Or did Jesus just walk up and know?
Yeah.
You don't need, it's not that important. But I just like it that they have him walk up without asking her name.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Hello, Joanna." It's like,
yeah.
Did you,
I see what you
Jesus,
did there.
did you just do that? Let's see. I like the way they are starting to show women financially supporting the ministry. As you say, that's grounded in the gospel. Yeah, and they're going to actually keep building that up over the season. To where I believe that we actually had that mentioned, I believe, in this episode, where the women say that they're going to join Zebedee with the whole olive oil business. That might be in the next episode. I don't remember if it's.
No, that's
we'll get
whenever they go to the house.
Yeah,
and they're packing. They're packing up their stuff, about to leave.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then he says, "Oh, Ramah says," he was like, "Oh, I think Zebedee's like starting he's been pressing olives, and he said that we could join the business."
Okay. Yeah. So
they don't talk about the women's ministry until the second episode, whenever Jesus is with all the people at the table. That's whenever he says that they're going to live in the house with Matthew, and Zebedee's going to be the one protecting them.
Yeah, and so they're going to develop that further through the rest of the season, which is a biblical thing that happened, to where the women were largely responsible for supporting them, which is interesting. If you just think about that culture, the guys are the ones leaving their jobs, and the women are the ones taking care of everybody financially. It's like, oh, that's kind of flip flop. And so Joanna tells Jesus that John wants a strong visit from Jesus to Herod very soon. She says, "John's doing fine, but he thinks that it'd be really helpful for your cause if you just came and gave Herod a strong visit very soon." But he says he trusts you with the word soon. I like that part. And that's because
I want to make it very clear.
Yeah, and that's a callback to season 2, I think episode 5, where Jesus and John had an interaction where they talked about the word soon. And John's like, you and that word soon. And he's like, yeah. So you can see that Jesus likes using the word soon in a very vague way, which Jesus continues to like that even in the book of Revelation. He's like, I'm coming back soon. And so it's pretty funny. But what we do see here, and we're seeing the groundwork laid, where John is beginning to misinterpret Jesus's message and purpose. Because he says, yeah, I think that you should come and just like give a strong, like you need to make it clear to Herod who you are, and you need to come to my defense. And you, because they're not doubting you, like they're doubting you and they're talking bad stuff about you. You need to come out here and defend me. And it's like, oh, it's not quite how it's going to work. And so Jesus says that Andrew will go with Joanna down to Macaris. And then right before they leave, Andrew and Simon interact with one another. And it's really kind of a sweet moment, where you can see that everybody's just been affected by this sermon. Yeah. To where they're just kind of being more vulnerable. And Andrew's like, "Simon, I just want to tell you, you're a great leader. And I don't say it enough, but you're a really great leader." And Simon, for the very first time, says, "Tell John I said thank you." And he doesn't call him Creepy John. Yeah. First time I think Simon's ever called him anything other than Creepy John. And he says, "Tell John I said thank you." And Andrew's like, "What?" And he says, "If it wasn't for you following John, I would have never met Jesus. Yep. And we would not be here. And so tell John I said thank you." And it's like, this is really good moments. Like these 2 episodes are really good ones for Simon. Like there's also some funny moments for Simon, but you really see Simon stepping up into that leadership position in a kind of a humbler way.
I was about to say that.
Which is just really cool.
Yeah.
And then we cut to Thomas and Ramah, which is just
it's a little cute, awkward scene.
This is probably one of my favorite scenes. This is where we really get to see the humor stepping up, but I absolutely love this. And historically speaking, would a man and a woman be interacting with one another like this? Probably not. But it's so funny, just the way they interact with one another here. Great. We love it. And it's just, it's just great. So Thomas is like, "Ramah," or Ramah, I forget how he pronounces it. But they have this kind of flirting banter back and forth. And Thomas cannot pick up on a hint. And Ramah is fully aware of how into her he is. Yeah. But she, obviously, especially in that culture,
You don't take
the woman does not take the initiating step. Yeah. And so Thomas is like, oh, hey, I was thinking that I would come visit you maybe after the second meal. And she's like, oh, I'll have to check my schedule. I might be busy. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. And she's like, I'm joking. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, it's because, we've been around each other a lot. And she's like, I'm aware. And she's trying to be very clear to him. And he's just like not picking up on stuff. And he's just trying. And then eventually he's like, okay, well, I'll see you later. And he goes to turn away. And I love this. Like, honestly, this was so adorable. She's like, well, Thomas, maybe you could come back after my first meal. And finally he's like, oh, I'm picking up what you're putting down. It's a classic guy girl thing, where like the girl's like trying to be very clear, but they have to be so clear that, finally he's like, oh,
got it now.
Gotcha. Like, you actually want to see me soon. And she's like, yeah, idiot. Like, come on, buddy. Like, pick up on a hint. And so just really cute. He says, it's been quite a lot of time together. She says, I know. It's like, oh, this is like, oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
And then favorite part of the whole scene is that Thomas is like so proud of himself, and like he like watches her walk away. He's like, and then he turns, and you have just like Shula and Barnaby, and Barnaby's just over here like, yeah. And I really hope Barnaby ends up being Barnabas.
Yeah.
Because, well, no matter what, the word Barnabas means encourager, like encouragement, or like it means son of encouragement.
Yeah.
Like Barnaby, it means son of encouragement, and that's who Barnabas is. And so, or Barnaby. And so I really hope that Barnaby ends up being Barnabas. That'd just be really cool because he's been there the whole time and stuff. That'd be so
like
great.
The quintessential definition of an encourager.
Yeah. It's like, he's just standing there. He's like, good job, man.
Like a little proud dad.
Yeah. And even Shula, I love it because she's blind. But even being blind, she can hear. Like, this is an awkward interaction. And she's just like, go for it, guy. I just thought that was great. Jesus is strong and John's strong with Herod are going to be very different. Yes. Yeah, they're going to be very different interactions because Jesus will eventually meet Herod Antipas, but it'll go very different than John probably expected. Okay, then we cut to Yusef, and now officially we are in the aftermath of the Sermon on the Mount. We are cut away from, like, that's the first half of the episode, basically. Now we move to the back half of the episode, and we are away from the sermon grounds, right? The camp is being torn down, everything. And now we cut to the synagogue or the place where the Pharisees and stuff gather, wherever, like the study area. And Yusef is sitting down in a very ominously lit room. It was actually, it honestly looked kind of pretty cool place. Yeah, I kind of liked it. And Yusef is in there and he's writing furiously, but he realizes he's out of ink. And so he gets up and he has to go get some ink. And he's looking for the synagogue administrator, but he's not there. Instead, there's a new guy there. And this is one of those moments where I was kind of happy because my fan theory from one of the trailers proved to be correct, because we saw this guy in the trailer. It's this guy with the yellow hat. And I said, I think that guy is Jairus, or Jairus, however you want to pronounce it. And Jairus, or Jairus, he's the guy who has a 12-year-old daughter who will die, and Jesus will resurrect her. And that's coming later this season. And the main reason I saw that is because in the trailer, we have the moment where the woman with the discharge of blood, she touches Jesus' cloak. And in the background of that scene, there's a guy with a yellow hat. And the crowd isn't huge. And so I figured, okay, like, as a director of a TV show, you're not going to put somebody with that prominent of a costume in the scene unless you want attention drawn to them. And so I was like, that's probably a prominent character. And we know that Jairus is currently leading Jesus to his daughter in that scene. So I was like, I bet that's Jairus. And sure enough, bingo, I was correct. So this is Jairus, and he is the new synagogue administrator, which makes sense because when you get to the Gospels, he is called a ruler of the Jews, right? So a local ruler of the synagogue comes and finds Jesus. And so we know where this guy's trajectory is heading to, and it seems like he's going to owe that trajectory to the things that Yusef writes about Jesus, which is kind of cool. And so, right here, unless Barnaby comes into some money, I don't see that happening. That's true. Yeah, I don't know, because that's true. Barnabas did have some money because he eventually sells the plot of land and everything. But I don't know. We'll have to see. Okay, so Yusef runs out of ink. He goes to Jairus, the administrator. And here we have Jairus talking about his own family. And he mentions how he has a 12-year-old daughter, and he has another child on the way and everything. You're like, oh, okay, that's going to come back later. The 12-year-old daughter thing, not as much the child on the way, I don't think, unless that, I don't know what they're going to do there. But we also have Yusef here mentioning that he has family back in Jerusalem, which I believe this is the first time we've heard of this. But once again, it's laying the groundwork for the fact that Yusef is not actually from the Galilee area. He's from Jerusalem, and he's just been away longer than he anticipated, which makes sense if we're going with the whole theory of him being, Joseph of Arimathea, right? So maybe he's not from Jerusalem. He's probably from Arimathea, but he's got land and he resides in Jerusalem, which would make sense why he has a tomb there. Kind of cool. Yusef, Jairus mentions that he's good at bringing order amidst chaos, which honestly, I was having a tough time reading that scene, like just trying to read what type of mood was being established by Jairus here. Like, was he trying to be intimidating or what? But I think in the end, watching it the second time, I just landed that he was just trying to be like, hey, I'm a trustworthy dude. I know how to handle situations. I know how to bring order amidst chaos. There's a lot of chaos going on, and I go from town to town because I know how to fix problems. It seems like that's how he was presenting himself. And so I think he was trying to present himself as an ally, right? As a friend to Yusef. But it was kind of an awkward interaction that I was having a tough time reading, but I think that's on purpose. And so they have this interaction, and Yusef feels he must document what he sees, but he mentions that it's some weird stuff, and it's some of the chaotic stuff. And so Jairus, I'm just changing my Y's into J's. And so Jairus offers to protect Yusef's documents. He says, hey, I've got a safe that I can put documents in case you want things to cool down. And this is one of his practices to help bring order from chaos, right? Because sometimes people write stuff that they don't want getting out there. And so he says,
they regret it the next morning.
He says, if you want to write something down and you want to think about it, give it to me. I'll lock it up. Nobody ever has to see it. Which, if you're Yusef, you're like, well, this is perfect because, last thing he wants to do is get all excited about this Jesus thing and then, publicly be like, oh, I'm a Jesus follower, and then end up regretting it. And so you see the groundwork. Once again, he's kind of becoming a secret disciple, right? He's getting excited about it, but he's not doing anything bold. He's not putting this in the official Pharisee library. He's just writing it, documenting it, putting it away. That's it.
There if needed.
There if needed. He's curious. Maybe he'll touch it later. But so he says, and I think the last thing he says is, I imagine goodbyes were very hard for the people in other towns because he's like, I think I like you. I think we're going to get along very well. So then they depart. Megan says, I'm just getting out of the theater now. How'd you like it? Wow. Let us know. How did you like it? That's really exciting. I hope that you really enjoyed it. Hey, David, I know this isn't mentioned in scripture about Matthew and Zacchaeus interacting, but do you think they might cross paths in the show? I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, that's good. That would come later on in the show for sure. Whenever Jesus is passing through Jericho, I believe it is, right? I think Zacchaeus is in Jericho. But I think they would be that'd be a shame if they didn't interact. It'd be kind of cool because they have a very similar story, right? Zacchaeus is also a tax collector, and I think that'd be really cool. All right. So we move on, and this is you might notice that I really like scenes between couples. Because I really like the Thomas and Ramah scene. And now we cut to the Simon and Eden scene. And this is probably one place where I can totally see people getting a little bit upset over the scene here. I personally thought it was absolutely hilarious, but I imagine that there are going to be some people who watch this scene and they're like, this doesn't belong in a Christian show. I'm glad they put it in a Christian show. I think it goes with the whole get used to different tagline. But there are certain jokes being made here that I think, honestly, probably the funniest jokes of the whole thing, of the whole episode to me. They were cracking me up. The acting was great. But here we have Simon and Eden finally reunited once again. They are alone in their house. And Simon is a husband who has been away for a while. And he's finally at home. And he's like, honey, I'm home. It's like, what, Song of Solomon chapter 5? He's like, honey, I'm home and my head is drenched with dew. It's like knock, knock, knock. And so he's there and they start getting intimate. Nothing too risque. But, things are going to progress. But then lo and behold, a knock comes on the door. And in classic Simon fashion, he's just like, shh, shh. He's like,
be quiet.
We're not home. We're not here. Eden, don't you dare. And like Eden being eaten. It's like, we have to open the
Open
door.
the door.
And so they get up, they go over there, and they open the door, and lo and behold, it is Nathaniel, and he's arrived, and he's like, hey guys, so I needed a room, and Philip and Judas were staying with Andrew, I believe they said, but he says, I heard that y'all had an extra house because your mother-in-law was here for a time, but now she's not. And I will say, I believe that biblically speaking, Simon and Andrew actually stayed at the same place. I believe there's one place in the Gospels where it says that Simon and Andrew stayed, like, yes, Simon was married, but I think there's a place where it called it Simon and Andrew's house. But I think in the show, they're making it separate places. Not that that's significant at all. It just came to my mind, so I thought I'd mention it. But yeah, so Nathaniel wants to stay with Simon, and Simon's not happy. And the look on Shahar Isaac's face, that's the guy who plays Simon. Great. He made it so believable.
Just nailed it. Yeah.
He just looks at him, and you can tell he is not having it. And he's like, dude, brother, why? Why? I just wanted some time alone with my wife. This is not the time. And of course, Nathaniel, he's totally aware of what's going on. That's the funny part. Like, at first you think he's oblivious. He acts dumb. He plays it like he has no idea what's going on, but he totally knows what's happening. And he's like, oh, act like I'm not even here. You won't even know I'm here. And he's like, I'm hungry. And he goes over there and just grabs an apple, starts eating it. And Simon's like, dude, and this was a part that you loved.
On the roof.
yeah. Simon's like, oh, you can sleep on the roof, all this stuff. And he's like, Simon, you look like you want to hit me in the face with a rock.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's just funny stuff right here. But this is what I'm talking about, where there's a lot more humor in this episode. Like, there's just joke after joke. And whenever I was watching it the first time, I was kind of thrown off because I was like, that's a lot of humor. And I think it's just like PTSD from the Marvel movies. Whenever I see a lot of humor in things that are typically not as humorous, it makes me nervous. But I think that they did it really well in the show. It's just the Marvel movies have kind of scarred me in that regard, where I'm like, every time I'm watching a Marvel movie nowadays, like, they just cut to a joke every time. And I was like, ooh, I got nervous. But all the jokes here are at least more substantial too. It's not just like the same brand of humor. It's different stuff. I was a little uncomfortable, but nothing offensive. The scene when they showed up was hilarious. Yes. Yeah. It probably does make you a little bit uncomfortable at first, just because we're not used to that in Christian shows. But they're not going to cross the line and like show anything like they're not going to adapt Song of Solomon chapter 4 to a scene. They're not going to do that. But I think that they are trying to challenge us in the sense of what we're used to in Christian shows, because guess what? They're a married couple who have healthy desires.
Yeah, it's biblical.
And that's fine. That's okay. And they played it for a joke to where it's like, but you know, it's not like he didn't eventually kick him out. Like, no, like, they use self-control. They're like, okay, nope, we're going to be the better thing. But he wasn't happy about it. And that's just, it was in line with Simon Peter's character. And so finally, Nathaniel says, guys, I'm not oblivious. I'll put a pillow over my ears. And honestly, that is the joke right there that I thought, like, that was where they were so explicit about it. Because everybody knows what's going on, right? Everybody, like, you know, you can just read it. It's innuendo. You know exactly what Simon's thinking without him saying it. But right there where Nathaniel explicitly says, I'll put a pillow over my ears, that was the one where I was like, ooh, that's the joke that might get them in trouble. I personally thought it was hilarious, because that's where you realize, oh, Nathaniel knows exactly what's going on, which makes it even more funny. But I'll be interested to see how the general public responds to that, because I thought it was great. And then, lo and behold, Simon the Zealot also shows up, and he's like, hi, I would also like a place. And Simon Peter's just like, bro, this is another one. Nathaniel's like, oh, so do you still want me to go back on the roof? And he's like,
yes, that'd be great.
Yes, that would be absolutely great. All right. Then we got to James and John, and they are walking down the road. And this is another scene that we had seen before. And we'd seen elements of the prior scene before. No.
That's later on.
Later on. Yeah, we've seen that. But James and John, they're walking down the road. We've seen this scene before. And I remember in my video where I covered this scene, I talked about how a lot of it felt out of place to me. And mainly it was the humor that felt out of place. But contextually speaking, now that we've seen how much humor is in these episodes, it fit a lot more. Especially like even just one thing like with the handshake. Where whenever Thomas eventually shows up, they have this like little handshake thing. And I remember when I watched that scene in isolation, I was like, I just felt kind of weird. And I remember even the Chosen YouTube channel commented on it, and they were like, hey, people had handshakes back then. And I was like, well, yeah, I get that they had handshakes, but typically when you're writing a show, you only include things which are essential to progressing the plot, right? And that's why it felt kind of weird to me, because I was like, oh, well, how is that going to advance the plot other than just like showing their friendship? But you really don't need a secret handshake to do that. It just felt kind of weird. But in the context of the whole episode, where there were a lot of little running gags that were a little bit more humorous, even the handshake, I was like, oh, okay, it fit the mood. It was just a different, like, the mood of these first 2 episodes are different than the mood of the first 2 seasons. Yeah. Like, if you were to compare season 1, episode 1 with season 1 of episode 3, the mood of them are just totally, like, season 1 is a much more dramatic show. There are jokes littered throughout, but it's a lot heavier and more dramatic, I guess. Whereas now I think they've more found their voice and what they're trying to do. Right. And so
they're expanding on the characters, and now like they're going off 2 by 2, so they're getting to know each other more and all of that. So it makes more sense. Yeah,
for sure. And so James and John are walking. Thomas and John have they have this like back and forth banter where James is just like hungry, and he's like, I just want my mom's cinnamon cakes. Whereas John's like, dude, what about all these like amazing teachings we've been hearing and all this stuff?
Miracles.
Like, and James is like, yes, it's made me very hungry. And what we see with James here is we see this groundwork laid, and it goes in this episode and next episode, and it's going to build up to something. I don't know what it's going to build up to, but James is feeling left out on things, which is interesting. I wonder how they're going to handle that, because we do know that eventually Simon, James, and John are going to be the inner 3 of Christ's like 12, right? He has his 12, but he also has his like inner 3. And I wonder if maybe Jesus does that because he knows James feels left out. Right? Because whereas Simon and John, who are natural leaders, and back in season 2, episode 1, James and John, once again, you just see the parallels here, right? James and John were like they're brothers, but they were like stepping into leadership positions, and they were bonding a whole lot in the first episode of season 2. But now here we are in season 3, and James feels like he's being replaced by Thomas, which is interesting. I don't know where they're gonna head with that. But Thomas eventually shows up. They have the little handshake thing, and then we have Zebedee. 3 disciples of Jesus of Nazareth? That is how does he do it? Is it like
triple blessing?
Triple blessing. And I love Zebedee. And I was telling her that the actor at the premiere, he was dressed super great. It was fun. The humor definitely works in it. Yeah, I agree. The humor definitely works. I hope they don't overdo it, but so far it works for what they're doing. It's very tasteful, and it's my brand of humor. So I like that. Like, whereas the Marvel stuff, their humor, it's just like lame, and it just doesn't work for me a lot of the times. I get hungry a lot. Do you get the joke? I'm not sure if I get the joke. As just a general statement, I also get hungry a lot, and so if it wasn't a joke, I would agree. I'm not sure if I get the joke though.
If he's because that's what James said. So maybe
I get hungry a lot.
Like he's saying it for himself.
Yeah, maybe.
But it's almost like he's quoting James.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyways.
I don't know. Okay, cool. But all right. So then Thomas mentions that he has something he wants to talk to them about, and Zebedee and John are like, "Oh, we think we know what you're talking about." John's like, "Oh, I know that I know." Yeah. And then James, poor guy, he's like,
I don't know.
He's like, I have no idea. And so, I get it. It's because his first name is also James. Like, I get it. Okay, that makes sense.
I get the joke.
Yes, that
was good.
Bingo. Good job. All right. Then we cut to also, I like how they do this where Thomas says, I have something I want to talk to you about. And they all say, oh, well, except for James. They say, we know what you want to talk about. And then who does it cut to? Ramah with Mary Magdalene and Tamar, right? So they do that very well where it's like, that's just a general rule of filmmaking. Like, you want to have people mention something that justifies cutting to the next scene. Right. Yeah. Right. And so it's not random. And so he's like, I want to talk to you about something. And then it cuts to Ramah with Mary Magdalene and Tamar, and they are at Mary Magdalene's house, and they are just setting things up. And for them, we see their plot for the season kind of being laid in the groundworks. They're in a very small place, and it's kind of funny. They're looking around. They're like, I don't know where we're gonna stay. And for me, I'm like, I got plenty of room to stay
one
at.
Right
but
there, one right there.
Yeah, but they're like, this is kind of intimate. It's gonna be kind of warm. And they also mentioned that they're low on funds, right? And so they need a bigger place, which that's going to be resolved by the end of episode 2. Yep. And then we also have them needing more funds, which is also going to be beginning to be resolved by the end of episode 2. Yep. Right. And so we see their plot points getting laid in the groundwork there. And then Mary, whenever they open the window, which I like how they had the windows there, like just like the little thing
like
covering.
rain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Mary sees Matthew standing outside, and once again, that's going to be a little bit of a longer burn thing. I'll be interested to see how Mary and Matthew interact. But back in season 2, it seemed like, at least on Matthew's end, he was beginning to develop a bit of a crush on Mary. And we have little hints at it here as well. Yeah. To where after the brief interaction here, Mary comes in and says, "He's a good man."
Yeah.
And it's like, but we don't have like the natural chemistry between them as much as Thomas and Ramah. Yeah. With them, it's more like a growing appreciation for who one another are.
Right.
Like just the different quirks and stuff.
Yeah.
And
they come from very different backgrounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they both have sketched pasts in many ways. They're both rejected and viewed differently, and so it's kind of cool. And so Mary sees Matthew. She goes out there to see Matthew. What are you doing? And at first, I remember when I saw this first time, I was like, "Oh my gosh, what's Matthew about?" Like I thought he was about to just be like, "Hey, I'm about to do the same thing." Like I thought they were gonna have the same interaction as like Thomas and Ramah had. But instead, he's just like, "I don't know where to stay." Yeah. And he talks about how his dad had renounced him, and he's like, "Yeah, I gave them my house, and I don't have a house." And so he says, "I guess I'll just go camp, and I'll stay outside." And he's like, "Oh, that's so sad." Yeah. And he just voices that he's confused. And what I liked is that he thanks the women for caring. He thanks Ramah first, and then he thanks Mary as well. Yeah. And to me, I noticed this throughout both episodes 1 and episodes 2. You have people going out of their way to say thank you. Mm-hmm. Like Jesus, he goes out of the way. He says, like right whenever he has that interaction with Matthew while he's eating the food backstage after the sermon, Matthew's about to walk out and he's about to talk to Judas, but he says, "Matthew, thank you for helping me prepare." Yeah. And then whenever all the disciples gather around, he says, "Before anything, I want us to thank Thaddeus, Little James, and Nathaniel for working on the stage." And they all clap, right? Yeah. And then we have here Matthew saying, "Thank you, Ramah. Thank you, Mary." Mm-hmm. And then in a little bit, whenever Andrew and Mary reconcile, she says, "Thank you, Andrew." Mm-hmm. And like there's just very intentional moments where people are going out of their way to say thank you.
Yeah. You can tell that the sermon's slowly changing them.
Yeah, well, and it's weird because I'm trying to think if there's anything in the sermon where Jesus explicitly said something in regards to that. It's almost just like they're developing just a greater appreciation for people applying the sermon. Yeah. Right? That's almost like it's just
eye-opening type situation.
Like they're just beginning to look at other people rather than themselves. You know what I mean? Like it's like they listen to Jesus' words, they're processing them, and for the first time they're beginning to see the world as it is, and rather than just focusing on themselves and what they're doing, they're seeing what other people are doing. Yeah. And they're looking and they're saying, "Thank you." Mm-hmm. And discipleship, right? Jesus goes out of his way to thank people. Yeah. And so they're also going out of the way to thank people. I just thought it was really cool because it sticks out because you don't see people stuff like that, right? Like typically you would expect Matthew walks off and Jesus just turns to Judas. But instead he says, "Wait, Matthew, thank you." Mm-hmm. And you typically wouldn't expect people to take time, especially in a TV show. Yeah. Like you only have limited time. Yeah. But Jesus says, "You know what? I want to take some time." Round of applause for Nathaniel on them. Yeah. Like that's crazy. Yeah.
Well, isn't it interesting too how stuff like that they put that in the show, and it's a situation where Jesus might be teaching the disciples, but then as the viewer, it's teaching you to be more aware of that stuff.
Yeah.
Because then you think about the show in that situation whenever you go out and talk to other people. Yep. And now you're more aware of what other people are doing, and you're more aware to say thank you to others.
No, 100%. I mean, that's what it was doing for me.
Genuinely grateful instead of being like, I think it's easy to just like passively say thank you. You could tell that they genuinely meant, they were processing the words the person just said and is like specifically saying thank you. Like, I heard your words and I'm like very grateful for what you just said. Well, because
every single one of them was like, there was a breath before it. Like sometimes people will say something and a lot of times we'll just be like, "Oh, thank you." Yeah. But everyone, it was, "Hey, thank you." Yeah. And it's like, wow, that was cool. Like it was just something so subtle throughout the whole episode to where it wasn't like the main theme of the episode or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I don't even know what the episode's called. We don't know the title of the episode. I don't think. Yeah, but interesting. Okay, real quick. We have some comments here. Are you live now? Yes, I am live now. We are live. Welcome. Mm-hmm. Just got home from the theater. Welcome home from the theater. I'm glad you could join us. Poor Big James. When he went to drink the oil that was empty. I know, he just funny. Like there's a theme going on there, and I'm interested to see where they take that. Because like the idea of him feeling left out, and he's from episode 2, he's gonna be paired with Little James, who also feels left out in a different way. Yeah. And so I'll be interested to see, like, I think that Jesus paired them intentionally.
They
And
even
so,
mentioned it. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And so you have
Simon
Big
did.
James, like Big James is feeling left out socially. Little James feels left out, like when it comes to
It's his physical
physically. And
capabilities.
of all the different people there, Big James is probably the most physically intimidating of them, even more than Simon the Zealot. Like Big James is a big guy.
He's tall.
Right?
Yeah.
He's a big guy, like sharp features and everything. Like
Mhm.
so, I wouldn't be surprised if they learn from one another.
Yeah.
Right? And that could be where that's heading. And I know that there's a scene in the trailer where Big James, Little James are like hugging each other and they're both like weeping. And so
Yes.
there's going to be something coming there. I
Yeah.
think it's really cool.
That's cool.
The small hints of Judas's future really brought me in tears metaphorically, since we know his outcome. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and they've done it really well so far.
Yes.
I felt so bad for him. Matthew, this is talking about Matthew in that moment. Yeah, it's just really sad.
Mhm.
I really like Paras Patel. That's the actor who plays Matthew.
He
does a very good job. And even you just get to see, like, that's a hard part to play, because if you've ever interacted with Paras in real life, totally different guy.
Mm.
And just like even seeing him at the premiere and stuff, just totally different dude.
Mm.
But his acting is so well done, to where he played Matthew, and you literally see Matthew stepping out of his shell,
Yes.
like step by step.
Yes.
And that's like, and you just think about the complexity of it. They don't film these scenes in order, right?
Oh,
like,
yeah,
like there'll be times
random
like they'll be filming like
order.
episode 8 one day, episode 3 another day, like going all around the place, and he's got to keep track of how Matthew is developing.
Yeah.
And even like in episode 2, there's a scene like whenever him and Gaius interact, Matthew, like, he seems like a just totally normal person for a brief moment.
Yeah.
Because he sees Gaius, and like, this is the first time him and Gaius have really interacted since he left, right? I know this is going into episode 2, but if you're watching this, you've seen both episodes.
Yeah.
I just thought that was such a good moment, because we know that Gaius mentioned Matthew to Jesus in season 2, but they haven't interacted. So here, Matthew and Gaius interact, and there's like this one moment where he laughs, and he's like, "It's good to see you," or I forget exactly what he says.
Yeah.
But he just laughs, and it's like he's with his old friend.
Yeah.
But he doesn't know what's going on in Gaius' head. But now Matthew has developed more and more to have this appreciation of Gaius, and he has like this freedom to where he doesn't feel like intimidated by him, and it's just really cool. Like, I love that acting there.
Yeah.
Yes, Simon even touched on that in the end.
Yes.
On Matthew's development, or
no, on talking about how Jesus has placed them. I think that's what they're saying, that Jesus, whenever they were in the circle, Simon talked about that he thinks that Jesus specifically placed them together for a certain purpose.
Yeah, for sure. So from what I've heard, everything about Judas, he is said to be the most critical character or disciple in the show. Even director Dallas Jenkins said that he was the hardest character to write. Well, yeah, I don't know. When it comes to him being the most critical, I think they're all equally critical, because if you think about it, the apostles are the ground. Like, they're the foundation of the church, right? That's where the scripture comes from and stuff. It's on their authority that Jesus gave them.
Yes.
But I could totally understand why Dallas would say he was the hardest character to write. And I think he made a post about that earlier today or something like that. But yeah, I mean, Judas is a difficult character to write, also because you have to realize that there's audience expectations.
Yeah.
And he's got to be mindful of those without being dictated by them, and also trying to be fair to the character of Judas. And you don't want to just characterize him as a villain. You don't want to characterize him as a hero either. You want to characterize him as a real person, and you want to somehow find a way to naturally get him to the point he needs to be at. Megan says on the specific parent. Yeah, so that's what she was talking about. Welcome back, Double-Edged Sword Ministries.
Hello.
Good to have you here. All right. And so Matthew is confused. He thanks the women for caring, which I just once again thought that was so sweet. And then let's see. They go back inside. Mary says her thing about Matthew's a good man, and then they get into a debate about Joanna. And Tamar seems to really appreciate her.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead into episode 2 later on, whenever we see that Tamar is a little bit more unwilling to set aside her monetary things.
Yeah.
And there seem to be some things going in the background of Tamar's head that we don't fully know yet. That's going to be fleshed out later in the season. We've seen stuff like in the trailers where she's just like weeping and stuff. And then Mary Magdalene seems to be the most level-headed of them. Which, to be fair, she has been with Jesus the longest.
Makes sense.
And Ramah seems to be the most suspicious of her.
She is.
Which seemed out of character for Ramah. And so there's a lot of stuff going on here where you're like, these people are reacting different than I would expect them to react.
Yep.
To where I would typically think that Ramah would be the most gracious, just because of how we've seen her so far. And I would think Mary would be suspicious just because she has had a tough time trusting people in the past. Like, it was interesting. You're like, there's things going on here that you want to develop. And so that was cool. Then we cut to Joanna, right? So you see how, once again, they talk about Joanna, it cuts to her, right? And we have her and Andrew in Machaerus. And so at this point, they don't really show this in the show, but I'm assuming days have passed now. Because, I mean, if they went from Galilee down to the Dead Sea area, I mean, that's not like a one-day journey. That's a multiple-day journey down there. But for the sake of the show, I don't know if that's how they're having that, because it seems like they kind of make it seem like it's almost like just a 2-day thing. I don't know. But they go down there to Machaerus, and they go visit John the Baptist. And good to have John back. Yeah. What do you think about the scene between the three of them?
Yeah. I thought it was really good. One of at least like a line that really stuck out to me came from this scene. And it was whenever what is the name of the girl?
Joanna.
Joanna. Okay, yes. It was whenever Andrew and John had already talked a little bit, and then Joanna and John were talking. And he was I think she was talking about like, oh yes, like I went and told Jesus like all the things you told me to tell. And he was like, well, no, that's not like what really matters. What matters is like, what did you think of him? Like, what did you think about his teachings? And she was like, it was really good. And there was something about it, but I can't really like understand what it is. And he said, did it feel like whenever you were like starving, but you didn't know you were hungry?
Well, you're grateful for food, but you didn't realize you were starving.
Yes. Yeah. And I was like, ooh, that was good. Yeah. Like whenever he said, and I wrote it down in my phone whenever he said that, because I was like, that's a cool way to explain it.
Yeah. You're grateful for food without realizing you were starving. It's like you didn't realize there was a problem until you had the food and you realized, wow, I was hungrier than I thought. Hungry. Yeah. And like I was
and then she just like nodded her head and she was like, yes. And I was like, that is a cool way to explain that. And so I wrote it down on my phone.
Yeah.
It's like that was awesome.
We've only seen brief glimpses of John the Baptist here and there, but I like how they've interacted, and like he's just like he is a weird guy. Like there was one point where like when he sees Joanna, I didn't write it down, but it was the where he just talks about like how he met her. Yeah. And he's like, like I forget, like she was upset that I called out like Herod and his adultery, but I didn't call out her husband. It's like bro, like he just said it so bluntly, and he kind of like looked at her like as if she wasn't even there. Like he just like looks at her like she's standing right there, and he's like, crazy woman, am I right? Like it's like, dude, like you can tell that he's just like not a politically correct person.
Oh no.
And he just says things how they are, but like people still respect him for it. And
but he's Lucas.
Yes, so exactly. Psalm 4 was a great way to end episode 2. I think it was actually Psalm 3. Close enough though. But yes, I thought that as well. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Yeah. As someone who's lived with many different women from all different walks of life, it's just the normal catty as you get from living with someone you don't fully mesh with. Yeah, for sure. I didn't see much of an issue with it. I'm not sure what they're. I was shocked to see Joanna so soon. Yeah, I think that we're 3 seasons into the show, so they're having to lay the groundwork for a lot of these characters if you want to have the emotional resonance of who they are later on in the show. Yeah, and like for Joanna, she's mentioned later on in the Gospels, but it says that she supported his ministry, and so. If you're wanting to demonstrate her support in the ministry, you probably have to show that pretty early on, because if like she shows up like a week before Jesus dies, it's like, oh, well, it's like, well, she didn't support him that much. And so I think I get why, like they're having to introduce a lot of characters in this season. So I think we're going to meet a lot of main gospel characters in this season for sure. And so they go down there. John tells Andrew to focus on Jesus. And so everything John says is back to Jesus, back to Jesus, back to Jesus, focus on him. They recap the sermon, and Joanna says everything was like backwards. I mean, it's like it shows that she was shell-shocked by a lot of this, because she's like a wealthy woman. Even whenever she gets there with the guard, she says, it'll be embarrassing for me if people hear that I'm here with a friend, but it'll be devastating for you. And you're like, ooh, this girl's got a dark side to her. You're like,
she's got connections.
And so it's like, she's still learning. But it's like, wow, that's kind of intimidating. But she's saying, like he's talking about like the poor being blessed, and or like there's being a benefit, and then John corrects her and says blessed, and she says, yes, blessed. Yes. Like she's not used to using that word or something. And then John's excited because he says, how many were there? And they say thousands. And he just goes, oh, thousands. Like he's so excited about the idea. Like, yes, like here he's in prison. And he makes a joke. He's like, well, I've never stayed in a palace before.
Yeah, that was funny.
But you just see John's character to where here he is suffering in a prison cell, yet he has a smile on his face and he's giving thanks to God that Jesus has thousands listening. And he's like, yes, that's so great to hear. That's who John the Baptist character is. Like that is That's who he is.
Yeah.
He's like, he must increase, I must decrease.
Mm-hmm.
If I need to be in prison for him to have thousands, so be it. Really cool.
Yeah.
And then this is where Andrew and John have this interaction, and they step really close to each other. They're like right by the bars.
Yeah.
And we once again get to see that John's kind of misinterpreting Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, hey, and he quotes the passage from Isaiah that Jesus is going to quote in a few episodes. Maybe, I don't know when. Maybe the next episode? I have no idea. But at some point in the season, we've seen this in the trailer, we're going to have the moment where John's disciples go to Jesus and they say, hey, John wants to know, are you the one who's to come, or should we wait for another? Because John's having a little bit of a doubt. Like, he's starting to doubt. And Jesus quotes the passage that John quotes to Andrew right here. Mm-hmm. And it's a passage from Isaiah where it says, hey, the blind will see, the lame will leap, all that stuff. But he quotes the part that's most relevant to him, and he says, he will proclaim liberty to the captives and will free the prisoner. The issue is that whenever Jesus responds to John's disciples, he's going to leave out that part. And it seems like he's sending a clear message to John. Yeah. He says, yep, I'm doing the stuff the Messiah does, but I'm not here to free the captives right now. Mm-hmm. But one thing he does add that is not in the prophecy in Isaiah is he says, but I also resurrect the dead. Yeah. And so it seems like there's like a subtle message he's sending to John, and he says, you're going to die in prison, but don't worry. This doesn't end with death. Mm-hmm. And so, like, it's just a really powerful moment, and that's exactly where, like, they're laying the groundwork. You can tell they've done the research. They know what they're doing here. And John says, hey, don't worry. You don't have to worry about me. I'll be out of this prison in no time, and we'll be able to serve Jesus together. Yeah. But we know John's not getting out of that prison. Mm-hmm. Like, the only way he's getting out is a head shorter. It's like, so it's really sad whenever you hear it, but he's just misunderstanding it. Right. And that's really one thing that we see with a lot of the apostles so far and a lot of the disciples, and John included there. They're beginning to misunderstand Jesus' ministry. And that's eventually going to lead to some major pushback. Real quick. Well, I knew from the snipes that we'd see her this season. I just thought we'd see her later in the season. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I'm uploading a YouTube video. Drops tonight. Oh, very cool. We'll have to check that out after we get off this live stream. That'd be really cool. Okay. We're getting near the end of this episode. We're getting near the end. He also tells Andrew, hey, what line stuck with you? And it seems like this is probably the part where they were trying to preach to the audience a little bit, because they're saying, in anything that Jesus teaches, there's always going to be one line that sticks out to you, one line that was just for you. Yeah. Which the wording of that, I don't know if I agree with technically. Yeah. That was the one place where I was like, but whatever. I got what they were going for. It's like, it's fine. John the Baptist isn't perfect. But he says, there's a line just for you. What sticks out to you? And Andrew says the one that we probably, even last season when we saw Andrew was reacting, we were like, oh man, we know what line's going to apply to him in the Sermon on the Mount. And it was the part where it says, don't be anxious. Who of you by being anxious can add a single hour to his life? Yeah. And John the Baptist is like, yeah, that's true. So don't be anxious. Yeah. And so John says, if you want to help me, listen to him. Mm-hmm. Do what he says. Yeah. That's cool. He doesn't say break me out of prison. Yeah. He just says, if you want to help me, listen to him. Yeah. Do what he says. That's it. He must increase, I must decrease. Mm-hmm. Like just the characterization of John, really, really good. Cool. And once it just shows, I like how they've done their research and they know these characters really well, and they do a good job at stepping into their mindsets, because this is all fictional stuff. We never have like this interaction between Andrew and John in the Bible. We really know very little about John the Baptist in the Bible, but what we do know, this is consistent with, and I just think they're doing a really good job. Okay, now we cut to Judas once again, and this kind of ties into the last scene. If you want to help me, listen to him, do what he says. Well, Judas is doing what he says. How long will he do it? I don't know. So we cut to Judas, and he's packing things up, and he's looking at this mint plant sitting on the windowsill. And what we see is that he's really locking stuff up because he is leaving, and he's going to leave everything, go follow Jesus. So he wraps up the deed to his house, and he's walking out the door, and he, kisses the little, what's it called? What's the thing on the door in Jewish customs? Mezuzah or something like that? But whatever the thing is. And he's like, I got to go grab it. And he goes in, he grabs the mint plant, and he goes to this woman. And I actually had seen some behind the scenes pictures of him interacting with this woman. I was wondering who it was. Turns out it's his sister, and her name is Devorah. Which I believe is just a version of Deborah, right? So it's Devorah. They go up to her, and it seems like they haven't seen each other in a while.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, Judas," and they just go sit down. They're having a talk with one another, and he reveals his plans to go follow Jesus. And she says, "Oh, you're always trying different stuff. You're always doing different things." But finally he says to her, "My life can't be all about money."
Yeah.
To which she responds, "It's never not about money with you."
That was interesting.
And sure enough, he immediately follows it up by talking about how technically it is still about money, because he's planning on becoming their financial advisor and like doing all this stuff. And he's like, "I can help them." And so it's like, it's not about money, but it still kind of is. And so he's doing the right thing, but money is still one of those things at the forefront of his mind. And so it's very clever, right? They're not talking about him stealing money. They're not doing anything devious. His heart is in the right place and his intentions are pure. But this is where we do see the cracks, to where his sister has an insight to him that he isn't even aware of. To where she says, "It's never not about money." And for him, he thinks, "I'm just following Jesus." But it still is about money. And sure, he's using money for a good reason. I mean, money, you do need to consider things about money, but she is correct. Money is consistently a thing that is driving, like, it's just a very good thing where it's like, you have his sister introduced, so you know that she probably knows him really well. And sure enough, she knows him better than he knows himself. He doesn't even realize that, it is still about money, just in a different way. And for us, it lets us see, oh, okay, so this is a guy who, he just can't seem to shake it. He's just stuck thinking in terms of money.
He's probably been thinking like that for so long that it almost becomes like he's oblivious to it a little bit too. Because he's just like, that's just the way. It's almost like his brain has become like wired like that, because he just is always in that same thought path. No,
for sure. I love that line, that whatever part of the message sometime in our life will apply in the situation we're in at some point. So the thing with John the Baptist. Did you guys feel Jesus seemed a little busy or distant in these episodes? I felt bad when Matthew didn't get his questions answered in the beginning. No, not now, not Matthew. I actually didn't get that feeling at all. I think that really Jesus was teaching Matthew a lesson. So it's just like, hey, well, first off, Jesus is tired, I think. And that's something that we just need to recognize. Like, Jesus was a man.
Well, and it mentions multiple times in the Bible where Jesus like retreats away. I mean, usually a crowd of people follows him, but there's many times where he like gets on a boat with the disciples, or he goes different places where he retreats away to have his time by himself.
And I think Jesus teaching Matthew, hey, you can't expect to always get answers immediately. Like, you need to ponder this stuff. And sure enough, once we get to the next episode, we're going to see that's what Matthew's been doing. He has been pondering it. And even by the end of this episode, he's been pondering it. And so I think that's what he's teaching him. He's like, Matthew, you don't need all the answers. You just need what you got. And what I also like is that we have a little hint there that maybe there was more to the Sermon on the Mount than what we have in the Bible. Right? Because it's like Matthew's like, oh, there's certain things you said that you didn't write down. He's like, it's fine. Right? You're good. Right? Like, what you have written down is what needs to be written down. You don't need everything. You just need what I gave you. And that's fine. And so I don't think Jesus seemed really busy or distant. And if he did, I think it was intentional on his part. It wasn't like oh, I don't have time for you. I think it was, no, Matthew. Like, he knew what was best for Matthew in that moment. And it was like, no, I'm going to turn you away and do this. It seemed like her sister had a gut feeling. I think this is his sister, she meant to say. It seems like Judas's sister had a gut feeling it wouldn't end well. I agree. I think that she seems to feel weird about this. And he even, like, she brings up other messiahs. And he says, well, they didn't all die. Well, all the disciples didn't all die. And even how he says that, he's like, oh, yeah, I mean, this doesn't, like, it's one of those things where he says that thing. He's like, well, yeah, I guess they don't have a good track record. And he just kind of jumped into it impulsively, which, to be fair, pretty much all the other disciples we've seen so far, there's been like some thoughtfulness about it. Whereas for him, he heard one sermon and he's like, I'm going to leave everything and go follow this guy. There has been a little bit less like thoughtfulness in his approach, right? He was just like, whoa, which in a sense, there's beauty to that. I mean, typically that's the reaction we typically go for any Sunday at church. We're usually trying to preach one sermon to motivate people to give their lives to Christ, where realistically,
count the cost.
You need to count the cost. You need to stop and you need to process things and you need to really meditate upon this stuff. And usually one sermon, that'll give you some feelings that will last for a little bit, but what are you going to do whenever those feelings fade? And so it's kind of ironic because Judas, is reacting how we typically go for in churches.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of the other apostles, they've had time to reflect on it and think about this stuff. I guess an exception would be Simon Peter a little bit, because he did have a very, like, he had that come to Jesus moment right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, his sister definitely seems to think, this might not go super well.
Yeah.
But to be fair, she also really doesn't know much about Jesus other than what she's heard around town.
Yeah.
And she says, it's kind of mixed.
Yeah.
Let's see. So he gives her the deed for the house and the mint plant and just asks her to take care of it. And she says she will. He says that he will help with the money and use his skills, which we know that he will. And we see this in episode 2, but he's going to become the treasurer. And how they handled that in episode 2, I thought was really clever, because I've always wondered, why is Judas the one and not Matthew?
Yeah.
And the way they handled it is actually kind of the opposite how I expected it, because I expected it to be everybody's like, yeah, we're not trusting Matthew with this stuff because he used to be a tax collector. Whereas in the show, they're saying, well, actually, he should be because he was a tax collector. Yeah. But I thought they handled it really well. Mm-hmm. But he says, yeah, I'll help them with money. And sure enough, that's what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. He says that Jesus is the Messiah, and this is crucial. He says, if he is the anointed one, he will not be killed. Yeah. So right there, right off the bat, we see what Judas's perspective is. He says, if this guy is the Messiah, he won't be killed. Yeah. Well, we know how Judas's life ends. Yeah. Right? It says in the Gospels, in the Gospel of Matthew, it says, and when he saw that he had been condemned, he was filled with remorse. He threw the money back and he went and killed himself. Yeah. Because it seems like that's the moment where Judas said, I guess this isn't the Messiah. Mm-hmm. Or we don't know what was going on in Judas's mind. Yeah. But he realized he'd betrayed innocent blood, and he went and killed himself. Yeah. And so it's like, that one line, it tells you so much. He has placed an expectation upon Jesus that Jesus has not established. He says, if he's the Messiah, he will not be killed. But Jesus is going to say, I'm going to be killed precisely because I am the Messiah. So that Judas is going to have to figure that out. And you're going to be like, ooh. And so we see the groundwork. Whenever this guy fails him, what's he going to turn back to? Probably the same thing that he's always gone back to. Money. Yeah. Right? So you see how they're laying the groundwork. You're like, but at the same time, you really like this character so far. Mm-hmm. And so it's going to be more heartbreaking, but you see the cracks. Yeah. And then this is where Devorah says, hey, you're the last of your name. Mm-hmm. Like, if you die off, our family name's gone. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, Judas will die off, but his family name will live on forever in infamy. Mm-hmm. And he's the only one who's going to be known of his family name, and it's not for being a good guy. Yeah. That's the heartbreaking reality of it. Like, what the words he's saying are so ominous. Yeah. And he says, Adonai has set me apart for a reason I do not yet know. Mm-hmm. And I owe it to him to figure out. Mm-hmm. It's like, yes, you are set apart for a reason you don't yet know. Yeah. But it's not going to be good. Not the best. And it's not because you're faithful. It's actually because you're going to be unfaithful. Mm-hmm. Have you guys noticed, too, that not all the cast are of Jewish descent in real life? I kind of wonder what ancestry Elizabeth Tabish is. Even Jonathan Rumi isn't Jewish. Ironically, Jesus is a Jew. Yeah, most of them aren't Jewish. That really doesn't bother me too much. I honestly think, I'll actually bring this up. Why does Western culture portray Jesus as a white Caucasian guy with blonde hair, but he is of Middle Eastern? So the main reason a lot of Western culture did that is because, it's usually based off Renaissance paintings and stuff. And to be entirely honest, it was only in the last 10 or 20 years that people honestly, really the last 10 years that people became super hyper focused on that. And if you just think about this is something where I think the culture that we live in kind of gives us a prejudice against things. We live in a technologically advanced society where I can go on Google and just type in, what does a Middle Eastern person look like? You have to realize for the majority of human history, that's not what it was like. And so if you're a person in Renaissance Italy who is hearing about this Jesus guy, you might hear that he's Jewish, but what if you never interacted with a Jewish person? Yeah. You're just going to
just like the people around you.
Yeah, you're just so you actually see that throughout history. Like in African cultures, they portray Jesus as dark, as African, and he's dark skinned. And so every culture's done this, but the main reason why we always see the blonde hair, blue-eyed Jesus is because most of the most famous art pieces in world history came from the Renaissance era and Western culture. So that's the main reason why we have that. And honestly, it doesn't bother me that much. I do appreciate the fact that they're going for more cultural appropriate stuff. Honestly, that just really doesn't bother me that much. I'm more concerned with them accurately portraying the stuff than everything being perfectly ethnically and culturally correct, because it really is not a big factor to me at all. I wonder what the crucifixion scene is going to look like in season 6, because the Passion of the Christ portrayed that powerfully and realistically. Yeah, I'm interested. It'll be interesting to see. Every bit with Judas felt like a punch to the gut. Just wait, it's going to get crazier. The only one I think is Jewish is the one who plays Simon Peter, but look wise is pretty accurate. They all look Jewish, which it's kind of sad, because if we're thinking about it, we're the whole thing, the whole reason they do the cultural thing is because they're trying to make it not just about looks, but that's kind of how we typically end up judging it, unfortunately. Shahar Isaac is Jewish, and I think actually the reason why he wasn't at the premiere is because he was back in Israel, I believe.
Oh, really?
So all right, then we move one more scene to Yusef and Jairus, and then we're going to cut to our last 2 scenes real quick. So Yusef and Jairus, Yusef shows back up, and he has written some stuff, and he gives it to Jairus, and Jairus looks at it, and he says, "This is for the safe," and Yusef says, "Yes, it is." And you look at it, and there's Hebrew letters on there, which once I actually get this stuff, I'll see if that's accurate Hebrew. But it says, "To Nicodemus of the Sanhedrin, confidential." And so once again, you have that groundwork laid of Yusef and Nicodemus interacting, and he's writing something secretive, but then Jairus notices, this isn't sealed. And Yusef says, correct. And then he just walks out.
Yeah.
And so Jairus picked up on the message that he's like, oh, he wants me to read this too.
Yep. I loved that part.
Yeah.
I love that. I chuckled whenever that part came on.
Yeah. But it's once again, it's like the secret disciples thing, right?
Yeah.
He's like, okay, so you're not showing this to anybody else, but I'm going to show this to you.
Yeah.
Right. And he knows that Jairus, he can't hold back. And so Jairus is going to unroll it, and he's going to start reading it. Yeah. And this is going to lay the groundwork where Jairus is going to learn about Jesus, so that whenever the time comes and his daughter's in need of help, who's he going to go to? Ghostbusters. No, I'm kidding. Jesus. He's going to go to Jesus.
Ghostbusters, definitely.
And then we cut to the final 2 scenes, but they're set in parallel to one another, where you have Andrew walking up to a door, and you don't know who's on the other side of the door. And then you have Matthew also walking up to a door, and you don't know who's on the other side of the door. But then we cut to Andrew first, right? And Andrew knocks on the door, and lo and behold, Mary Magdalene comes out. And you're wondering, what's going on here? But if you remember season 2, you remember that he said some very hurtful things to Mary Magdalene, because back in episodes 5 and 6, she had this whole thing where she kind of just left and abandoned them. And as a result, a bunch of stuff happened. And whenever Andrew was super anxious about John the Baptist,
they showed it at the beginning.
Yeah, they showed it in the recap. Yeah. Whenever Jesus was taken into custody and all the stuff, Andrew started deflecting, putting all the blame on Mary Magdalene. Yeah. And he said some pretty harsh stuff to her. And he comes up and he says, hey, during the sermon, Jesus said a lot of things. And he specifically said that one line about, if you have something against your brother or sister, go get reconciled before you worship. And so the idea is that he wants to worship. And so if he's going to do this discipleship thing right, he's taking John the Baptist's words. And John said, listen to him and do the words. And Andrew says, I'm going to do them. I said a lot of things to you I should not have done. And I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I need to tell you, I am sorry. And once again, Mary Magdalene, remember, it cut to her at the beginning where when Jesus said, forgive us our debts, we forget our debtors. And it cut to her. She looks and says, thank you, Andrew. I think you're the very first person who's ever apologized to me. And he says, you don't deserve that. You deserve better. And it's just a really sweet moment.
It is.
And then he said, one thing I loved it. He said a lot of things. I have a lot to work on.
Yeah,
that's
like that.
Pretty much anytime I'm reading the Bible, that's how I feel. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got a lot to work on.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't catch that it was Nico. Yes, yeah, it was written to Nicodemus. That was really cool. You said that Jairus was really sus. Yeah, he was a little bit. I'm ready for that Chosen and Ghostbusters crossover. Who are you gonna call Ghostbusters? Jesus, just Jonathan Rumi shows up in a Ghostbusters outfit.
Yeah.
Hey, David, have you seen the old classic film Jesus of Nazareth casting Robert Powell as Jesus? I remember that movie when I was little. Many fans had a debate which Jesus was the best. Many said Robert. I don't think I've seen that one, but I need to. Eventually, I would like to make more reviews of other Jesus movies and stuff. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Yeah. You saw season 3, episodes 1 and 2 this afternoon. Awesome. Nice. great. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope that you stick around for the rest of this little review, which we're going to be wrapping this up pretty quickly soon. And then tomorrow at 8 p.m., I think we're going to do our spoiler review for episode number 2. All right, so Mary and Andrew reconcile. Please put your comment on the screen. Sure. And then we have Matthew, and he knocks on the door. Well, he actually doesn't knock on the door. He never gets to the door. He's walking up to the door, and lo and behold, his little black dog is there, starts barking at him, and it freaks him out. And this is where Matthew starts acting like his normal self, right? Where he's just like all like jittery and like freaking out, and he doesn't know what to do. But then the door opens, and a figure steps out of the shadows, and it's his father. Well, actually, it's not his father. It's Alphaeus. Right? And he looks at him, and the music's building up, and you can tell, okay, the end of the episode's coming up here. And he says, Alphaeus. And then Alphaeus looks at him, and a smile forms on his face, and he says, son. Cuts to black. The Chosen. And there's the end of that episode. What'd you think about that ending?
I liked it. I thought it was cool how they did Andrew and Mary, and then Alphaeus and Matthew, because once we get to the second episode, we're going to see how Matthew uses that same teaching from Jesus in their conversation, so it ties together really well. You just don't know yet until you get to the second episode. He uses the same thing.
No, absolutely. And it's all reconciliation. That's what it all is. And Dallas has said that the theme of the whole season is come to me, you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. And here we see that rest coming, right? It's not in the form of the stuff like here the Pharisees, they had all these rules and regulations about how to honor the Sabbath day. Jesus is giving a different type of rest, right? And he's teaching them how to reconcile to one another. And one thing that we see more in this season, these 2 episodes, than we've seen in any of the rest of the show, is that they keep saying shalom, 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 which is just a typical Jewish greeting, right? Like everybody says shalom to one another whenever they say hi, whenever they say bye. That's just what you say. But we have more emphasis on it in these 2 episodes. Honestly, probably the word shalom shows up in these 2 episodes more than in the first 2 seasons combined.
Probably.
And they're saying shalom, which means peace, right? It means peace to you. And so we have that reconciliation, that peace, that rest being formed here. Just a really powerful ending. And also it bookends it, right? So you have the beginning where we have Matthew standing at the door, and his father says, you are not my son. And then now we have, you are my son.
That's
and
really
so
cool.
in a way, there's a resurrection that happened in between, right? So we have the whole death to life, right? Like literally it's the gospel taking place, because at the opening of the episode, we have him saying, my son you're dead to me. We're going into mourning. But now my son has returned. It's kind of like the prodigal son in many ways, right? Except he didn't come running to his son, because as we're going to see in episode 2, he has his own repentance he's going to have to do. But just very powerful ending there. Really good stuff.
And it goes back to the quote, I think it's from season 1, whenever they say that I was one way and now I'm another, and the thing that in between was him.
Which inspired the Matt Marr song.
Literally, the thing in between was Jesus, because it was because of the sermon, because Matthew's parents also heard the sermon. Matthew heard the sermon. That's how all the reconciliation came about. So it was literally Jesus. It was Christ was the in-between for the bookend. So.
Holy collision. Also, that music video was so great.
It was great.
The editing of it is so great.
Cool.
I can't wait till they release it so I can just share it. And maybe I'll do an analysis of that. Who knows? Just got home from watching it. Wow, amazing first 2 episodes. I agree. It was great. LOL, it's like, who's the best Batman when people debate who played the best Jesus? Yeah, the hard pick between Jonathan and the one from Passion of the Christ. I think I like Jonathan's just because we've seen more of him, right? And
it's different too.
And we get to see more of his well-rounded character, and we just see an actual real type Jesus, so I like that. The tone of the episodes definitely shifted, even though they were pretty funny. Yeah, there was already humor. Like, each season has gotten funnier, which I think there's pros and cons to that. I like humor. I hope that it just doesn't overtake the show. Because I do like a lot of humor, just because I like that stuff. But as long as it doesn't distract from the message of it, which I don't think it will. I think they'll be really good at that. And I think that they're going to probably tone down the humor later on, as we build up to more heavy. Like, I think earlier episodes of each season will probably have more humor than later ones, because the scene's just naturally going to get darker and heavier with stuff.
Right.
Another great question: do Pharisees still exist in the 21st century? So actually, fun fact: when it comes to Orthodox Judaism, that actually grew from Pharisee. Like whenever you talk about rabbinic Judaism nowadays, that actually grew from the Pharisaical party. So if you were to go to Israel nowadays, which I'm going in February, with the Snipes and Brandon Robbins, rabbinic Judaism grew from Pharisaic Judaism. So we literally just have 2,000 years of more development from that. Because the Sadducees, they kind of ceased to exist after the temple was destroyed because they were the priestly line. And the Pharisees were kind of just the common person who took the law seriously. And so Pharisees actually quite literally still exist today. But we also see Pharisaism popping up in our churches and stuff in the form of legalism and stuff like that. So we could be Pharisees ourselves. It was awesome. Lots of mercy, forgiveness, a lot of hesed, right? Deep feelings and lovely, funny. Plus, I am going again Sunday afternoon too. Thank you guys for this video. I cannot wait for the rest of the season. Yeah, we were originally going to go again tomorrow, but I ended up we're not going again tomorrow just because we have other stuff we need to do. But yeah, but I'll eventually watch these again. I want to see if somehow I can get my hands on these so that I can begin editing videos. I don't know if I need to contact the chosen people there or something like that so I can do that, but that might be a while from now. Yes, there are Pharisees in Israel. Yeah, and there's Pharisees in our own hearts as well. They said Jim Caviezel. Yeah, Jim Caviezel was the name of the guy in Passion of the Christ. He's also in another great movie, which I just showed to my students called Paul, Apostle of Christ. The one thing I didn't like was the clapping that they clapped for Jesus and each other. It seemed like a performance, and I didn't like that very much. What do you think? We actually talked about the clapping thing while we were watching it. It didn't bother me too much. It's all about how you receive it. I don't mind people applauding for other people. It's really a matter of what are your motivations for clapping for the person and what are your motivations as receiving that clapping. I think they were clapping because they were showing genuine appreciation. And I don't think you only clap for performances. I think they were clapping for a job well done because they clapped for Nathaniel and them as well. Yeah. And I thought it was just like, hey, yeah, we're just respecting that you did a good job. And yeah, instead of just buying them a big meal, they're like, hey, we'll clap for you. And Jesus, I thought how he handled it probably was pretty consistent with how Jesus would handle that, where he was kind of uncomfortable. He's like, yeah, that's enough. Like, because I think naturally, whenever people do applaud for you, it should make you a bit uncomfortable. Not because applause is bad. It's just because if you're doing things for the right reasons, you're not doing it for the applause, right? And so there's nothing inherently wrong with people clapping for you. It's just about how you receive it. And so, yeah, it didn't really bother me too much. All right, that's all we got. This ended up being a much longer video than I intended. Yeah. I am actually, yeah, it is usually how it goes. But I'm glad that y'all were here interacting with us. It really means a lot to us. Yeah. And I'm so tired. It's almost midnight. You need to get home. Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And like I said, this is not all we're going to do with this episode. I'll eventually come back. And I don't know if Brienne's going to join me or not. We'll see. A lot of times I have to film videos because I don't want every time her and I to hang out to just be sitting and filming videos. Yeah. And so a lot of times I will just be making videos on my own. But I'll try to get her to at least be with me during the spoiler talks that we do on live streams. Yeah. Just because it's easier for me to do that rather than just talking to a screen. Yeah. Yes, I'm glad that you caught it live as well. I wish we could have talked to you more in person. I really... yeah, I wish that we could have talked to you more in person, but we're glad that you're live here. And who knows, maybe if they go back to theaters, we'll be able to organize it to where we are at the same theater again and stuff. Yeah. I think they really executed the sermon pretty well with it being and applying to what Jesus saw. It's extremely probable what could have happened. Yeah, I agree. Like I said, I think it's funny that he wasn't on the stage, but realistically, I don't think he would have had a stage anyways in real life. I just thought that was kind of funny. I'm glad you made the live as well. Yeah. I'm excited to do a little more lives because I like interacting with y'all. Yeah. And now that we have a little bit more of an audience, especially with chosen stuff, we'll be able to do that. Yeah. But that being said, that's it for tonight. Do you have anything else you want to share about the episode?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. We have one more comment right here. I wish I caught the beginning, was leaving a late night showing. Yeah, I know. That's unfortunate, but yeah. Tomorrow night, like I said, we are going to be doing episode 2, and we'll be doing that earlier because right now it is late. I don't know what time it is where y'all are at. It is almost midnight where we're at, and I'm tired. So we're going to do it at 8 p.m. tomorrow, so mark your calendars. I have not set it up yet, but I'm going to set it up literally as soon as we get off this. I'm going to go set it up. I just didn't want there to be 2 streams so to confuse people. So I'm going to go set that up for 8 p.m. tomorrow night. Be here. We'll interact with one another. Tell your friends. Get us all on here. Let's build this community up so we can talk more about The Chosen. And we will go in depth into episode 2, which I actually think I liked episode 2 more than episode 1. mainly because that's where we get to more of the discipleship stuff, and really just the scene at the table.
Oh yeah,
is probably just my favorite part that we've gotten out of season 3 so far, because it's also the biblical moment. We didn't get anything biblical in this one other than the Sermon on the Mount stuff, and so like I like Bible moments, and so we'll talk about that real quick. Great video, David and Brienne. Looking forward to more from you. Take care. God bless you both. Thank you, Medina. Same to you as well, and to all of y'all watching this. It's 1 a.m. where I'm in South Carolina. Yeah, cool. So it's even later for you. Go to bed. Get some sleep. Get some rest. Thank you so much for joining us. Really do appreciate it. We will talk to y'all mañana, Lord willing. That means tomorrow in Spanish. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow to talk about episode 2, and then I'll start brainstorming different ways where we can start making more Chosen related content in the weeks to come. I look forward to it, and it's gonna be good. Brienne, thank you for joining me. And do you have anything else you want to say?
No.
All right. Well, we will see y'all later. Be sure to keep a smile on your face. Don't let anybody steal your joy. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and comment below and let us know what your favorite scene from this episode was and where you went and saw it, because I would love to see those things, and I'd love to interact with y'all in the comments. And I think that's about it for tonight. See y'all later. Be sure to share this with your family and friends and strangers as long as they've seen the episodes. If not, go find my spoiler-free review and share that with them. Or the vlog. If you haven't checked out the vlog, it's really fun. I actually recorded the whole Atlanta event, and not the whole thing, but like I recorded my experience of it so that you could join us if you weren't there. But yeah, have a great night. See y'all later. God bless. See y'all tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye. Ba-da-da-da-da.